disappointed in every one of you.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend you.
I'm disappointed in every one of you.
I kiss you on the mouth.
No, I'm not cool with that. Just, I'm sorry.
One more time.
I'm disappointed in every one of you.
I mean, I'm dealing with degenerate animals.
I'm disappointed in every one of you. Disappointed in every one of you.
All right, come on.
Honestly, I can't do it, man.
I'm disappointed in every one of you.
Let me tell you why.
It's gonna be all right, Nicky. Go ahead, shoot.
You just killed a little fucking man.
What are you going to do about it?
Yeah, because you got nothing. You don't got a thing. Yeah, because you got nothing.
Lobito!
You got nothing.
I want to get out. I want to get out of this rat hole. I want to get online. I need
BDA boxing.
All right. Whoa, welcome everybody to another BDA Boxing podcast, broadcasting to you live from the true north. This is your host, Mr. BDA, and I'm glad that everybody could be on board for this one, fellas. In this episode, we got a fantastic one for you. Another one of our historical reviews. We're going to be focusing on one fighter, one all-time great fighter, and we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty about their career, what made them an all-time great, and maybe even dispel a couple of myths, because, all these all-time greats, they all have myths that need to be analyzed and perhaps even toppled. So we'll get to that. Before we get down to the fun, let's get the business out of the way, fellas. You know the drill. If you want to donate to us via Buy Me a Coffee, the link is in the description below. Don't forget to hit the like as well. Subscribe, you have to do so already. Don't forget you can also join us on our Patreon. You can donate as little or nothing, as much as you enjoy giving us, supporting us over there. We do post free videos and we'll continue to do so. We have a couple of things planned for these upcoming fights. Tank Davis, the mega card in Saudi Arabia, just a whole bunch of stuff. So stay tuned for that. Don't forget to check us out on Spotify, iTunes, and Spreaker at your leisure. And that's it, man. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Oh, and by the way, excuse me. I want to really thank everybody in the Patreon. I just mentioned Patreon, and you guys don't have to donate, and yet you do. And we always appreciate it. Any type of money, whether you have a lot or not, is still money. It's still hard-earned money, and you guys are providing it to us so you can, you keep supporting us and keep us afoot here with this platform. Hopefully, you guys enjoy it, and we really appreciate your support. Any type of support as well, man. But really, specifically and especially to the people who are paying with their putting their money where their mouth is, as it were. So shout out to you guys. Hopefully, you enjoy the show. And we'll continue to entertain you and hopefully inform you with some of these shows. All right. So the agenda today is, like I said, just like we did with Julio Chavez about 3 weeks ago, we're going to be reviewing Pernell Whitaker and, a contemporary of Julio Chavez. So let me just invite a couple of people here and we'll see what happens. Shout out to everybody. By the way, I understand a lot of people want to talk about the latest rumor that supposedly Canelo will be fighting Jake Paul. As always, for the moment, it's just a rumor, and I don't have much to say about it until it actually materializes. So we're going to be continuing on focusing on the Pernell Whitaker episode here. All I'll say about the potential Jake Paul fight is I don't understand why people are making it out to be as if the Crawford fight is off. Guys, remember, this Jake Paul fight is supposedly set for May. So there's still the potential that they might renegotiate with Terence Crawford. Again, I don't know what happened there. between Crawford and Canelo. The fight was never signed, but people assumed it. And again, people got to stop assuming and taking everything they see on the internet seriously. So we'll see what happens. Quickslot, shout out to Quickslot, is calling Canelo Alvarez Saul Money Alvarez. Hey, yeah, maybe that's gonna be the new nickname, man. He has, I mean, if he does fight Jake Paul, it's probably gonna break records. Probably gonna break the Pacquiao Mayweather record. You just never know. So we'll see what happens. But for the moment, we got more pressing matters at hand, such as this Pernell Whitaker retrospective that we're gonna be doing. I got the chief. I get the Master Chief in the house. Chief, are you there? Oh, he just left. I think he heard Canelo and Paul and decided, you know what, I've had enough of this boxing game. Getting the hell out of here. Yeah, listen, it's a bad fight. It is a bad fight. But it doesn't preclude the Crawford fight or even the Benavidez fight from taking place in September. So we'll see what happens. Well, again, that fight's not even official. They'll say one, as it pertains to Canelo, they'll say one thing one day and then the next is another thing. So I'm not too worried about this. But while Chief returns, I want to focus here on the Pernell Whitaker thing because Chief is back. Chief, are you there? Yeah.
Evening colors. The flag was being taken down. I had to stop and honor the flag.
Did you say you were being attacked by a fly? Is that what you said?
No. Sunset. The American flag's being taken down, and I had to render honor to the colors.
Oh, because you work at okay, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I got confused. I thought you said you were being attacked by a fly, and I said, all right, well, I don't know if I don't know if there's such a thing as an allergy, fly allergy, but I certainly, oh shit. Yeah, now, unfortunately, I cannot silence that alert, but shout out to Ason for his contribution via the Buy Me a Coffee. I'm going to try to work on seeing if I can lower the volume because it is a little bit loud, I think. But be that as it may, shout out to Ason for his contribution via the Buy Me a Coffee. And he says, hold on a second, let me just put this up here. Hey, the message was there up for a little while and then it just disappeared. Again, I don't know if there's a way to maybe keep it up there longer, but shout out to Trey Ason for his contribution. He says, hit the like. Where is Jimmy? Jimmy, from what I understand, is doing A-OK. I mean, as it pertains to, he's not dead. I know people keep thinking that, but he's still around. He's got some stuff to deal with outside the boxing, more important stuff. So he is still around. He'll be back. Very busy. And so hopefully, hey, you never know. He'll pop up one of these days. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. Who knows? That is loud indeed. So shout out to Trey Ason. I share the sentiment. I hope Jimmy comes back real soon. And hit the like. Shout out to Trey Ason. Shout out to Double L for his contribution to the Buy Me a Coffee as well. He says, Jake Paul is the most righteous man in boxing. Slapped around registered sex offender Mike Tyson and will now knock out confirmed murderer Saul Alvarez. Known murderer. So apparently, that's Double L's take on this. Apparently, well, Mike Tyson technically was convicted, although there are some holes in the story. And I don't think I've ever heard anything about Saul Canelo Alvarez murdering people, but hey, you just never know. What happens in Mexico stays in Mexico. So shout out to Double L for his contribution via the super chat. All right, Chief, I want to thank you for accommodating us. I know it was last minute, and I told you that it wasn't going to be last minute, but I'll tell you off the air if you want to hear my excuses about why this happened. But I really want to thank you for being here. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to the show. And if you want to get started, man, let's go.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having me, sir. You know that I'm never one to shy away from wanting to talk about boxing. So,
all right.
So I definitely appreciate the invite. So off the top, this is Pernell Whitaker, correct?
That's right.
So in 1984, he was one of many outstanding U.S. amateurs that did very well in the Olympics. He was part of the gold team. And I believe Steve McCrory, Terrell Biggs, I'm not naming them in order, of course, Meldrick Taylor, Pernell Whitaker. I missed someone else along the way, but there's a couple other ones that won some gold medals. Virgil Hill silver, Evander Holyfield bronze. So we had a very stacked Olympic class, and he was one of the ones that won. And let's see, this was the one out in LA, if I'm correct,
Yeah.
1984. And so I remember watching as a child. I was pretty young, but I remember watching it. He wasn't the one that caught my attention, of course, being from Georgia. Vander Holyfield was the one I was watching. Of that class, I think he was the last gold medalist to win a title. And that's what HBO said one time. I have not looked up the exact dates to verify that, but he was part of it was also that was a stacked lightweight division at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember, I think Boxing Monthly or something like that had a list of lightweights that were former champions and top contenders. Whitaker was, of course, one of them. And it was kind of like when the four quote unquote queens recently came around. We had four really good standouts, and then a bunch of French contenders underneath them. It was a very similar situation, but some of these guys were former world champions back then, and also former top contenders from lower weight divisions, like Cornelius Bells Edwards and a couple guys like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, go ahead.
I don't want to spend too much time on it, but do you think that 84 team, first of all, that 84 team, was that the one where the Ruskies set it out, or?
I believe the Cubans did too.
Okay. But it's still, I mean, it's quite an accomplishment. I mean, the Americans did set out the 1980 Olympics, so I guess it all evened out. But do you think that American 1984 team was better than the 1976 one?
I'm Mark Breland. Suddenly that jumped in my head because Sugar Ray Leonard was, okay. So
Right.
Mark Breland was another gold medalist. Moving back to your question. I mean, it depends on which weight class you're talking about. Light heavyweight, I'm pretty sure that's going to be Leon Spinks versus Vander Holyfield. To put that in perspective,
right,
of which gold and bronze medalists we would be comparing, and if those teams would have fought each other, they're from the same country. That's one of the things you have to ask yourself. At middleweight, I don't even know who the middleweight representative was in '76 because I don't remember off the top of my head. He would have had to fight Virgil Hill. Would he have beaten Virgil Hill? But do I think that Howard Davis Jr. would have lost to Pernell Whitaker? No, not necessarily. Not in 3 rounds. That doesn't mean that I think one team's better than the other. I think you have to take each fighter and rank them. I'll put it this way: 139 junior welterweight. That's where Ray Leonard was. I don't think an American is beating Ray Leonard. Period. To make the Olympic team. So case by case basis, if you take each weight class, Howard Davis Jr. might have beaten Pernell Whitaker. But Ray Leonard would have definitely still made the team if we put those teams together as a box off to see who would win. So the team as a whole, with the Cuban team wasn't as powerful and 76 that I remember as a whole as it was by the time the 80s and 90s came around.
Right.
And again, this is, I was a child then, so memory serves of what I remember of Cubans. There were some good ones back then, but it wasn't like they were racking up all the medals internationally back in 1976. Whereas by around 88, which was not this class, but that's when they started really racking those up in several weight classes. So I can't really say, unfortunately.
Those were the days.
Back to Pernell.
Yeah, well, those were the days for you Americans with the gold medals. But I will say that before you continue, just to give people, because again, sometimes we forget, people might not know, there's youngins out there who might not know who Pernell Whitaker was, or they've heard the broad strokes. So before we continue, let's just give people the dossier on what Pernell Whitaker accomplished overall. He was from Norfolk, Virginia, the ghettos of Norfolk, Virginia. I ended up actually being an astounding amateur. Chief mentioned the Olympic gold medal, but he also earned silver at the World Championships 2 years before that, and gold at the Pan American Games. Overall, historic and legendary career in the professional ranks as well. 46 total fights, 40 wins, 4 losses, some of those disputed, as we're going to see later on, 1 draw and 17 knockouts. He's considered one of the best defensive fighters of all time. Possibly one of the best since Willie Pep. Despite the fact that he couldn't really crack that much, although he did carry a bit of a wallop, as we're going to see later on. He's still one of the greatest American fighters and overall best fighters of all time. Always in the discussion of some of the top lightweights of all time. And so, yeah, man, that's what we got with Pernell Whitaker. And we're going to see, again, the point of this is to revisit the career, the high points, the low points, and maybe topple some of the myths that have been fermenting since his retirement and especially since his death. But yes, go ahead, Chief. We left off with the Olympic accolades.
Well, we want to add the fact he was a 4-division champion as well as far as his accolades, and we'll get to each one of those championships as we move on. So Olympic accolades, he did win the gold medal. I don't know if he was the last one to turn pro, but I think if memory serves from a TV promo about him, he was the last to win a world title. But aside from Evander Holyfield, the two most successful Holyfield wasn't a gold medalist, but the two most successful of that Olympic team, you'd have to say were Evander Holyfield and Pernell Whitaker.
Right.
Easily. So that's his debut. They started him off tough. He wasn't fighting like tomato cans with a bunch of losses. He was fighting guys that had a very high win percentage from the very start. I reviewed some of his career a couple weeks ago. I don't remember everybody's name. I remember all the way up until about maybe his fourth fight. He hurt his hand. He hurt his left during the fight. He said he might have broken it. I remember in the post-fight interview. And he really wasn't a big puncher after that. He loved to go to the body, but to go to the head, he was a little more reluctant after that, as early as his fourth fight. He was a good finisher when he got you hurt, but he never went out of his way to really hurt you. He was perfectly fine with just peppering you with his jab and throwing his combinations and being elusive. I don't remember the gentleman's name that beat Wilfredo Gomez at 130 for the title. It was an upset, but Whitaker fought him in less than 10 fights, and that was like the coming out party of like, oh, he fought his first former world champion. And that's when everyone took notice that Pernell Whitaker was going to be in the mix at the lightweight championship one day. Which leads us all the way up to his first big test, which was Roger Mayweather.
By the way, I believe the guy you're referring to was Alfredo Lane. The guy who beat Gomez. Yeah.
That's exactly who it was. And that came before Mayweather, but that was because he was a former world champion and Whitaker had less than 15 fights, even less than 10, if memory serves. They were like, oh, he took on a world champion this early in his career. He's definitely going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Can I ask, by the way, was he with the Duvas from the get-go of his professional career?
Yes.
Or? Okay.
Yes. The Duvas signed Breland, Briggs, Holyfield, Taylor, and Whitaker. They may have also signed Virgil Hill, but he was not he wasn't the top 5 that they were trying to promote. And later, Hill went on his way anyway. So those were the 5 that they were, the main events, basically got their bankroll going with it, as far as primary fighters. I think their first main events, on a side note, their first big fight was Leonard Hearns 1, but they weren't exclusively signed. They signed those 5 guys to large contracts and got them going immediately after the Olympics was over.
You know, the Quags in the chat says, damn, the Duvas had some pull back then. They really had, didn't they? I mean, because you look back and you wonder, how come Don King nor Arum was able to scoop up an Olympic gold medalist?
My guess from the way, given I was like in grade school, but in hindsight, I think the Duvas came with some good financial backing and came up and offered like huge contracts right away. They learned from what happened in 76. The guys from 76, those guys were getting TV revenue money plus percentages of the gate and everything else before they even fought for world titles. So those fighters in 76 were rich before that even happened. And because this was in LA, it was in America, they were American fighters. It was on mainstream primetime TV or even afternoon TV. It wasn't like at 3:00 in the morning on MSNBC, like eventually started happening with boxing. These guys were America sweethearts, and they were put out there for everyone to see immediately. So it was easy for them to sign them really quick because the marketing for them alone was going to be easy. These were American gold medalists, in 1984. And, the stigma of 1984, thanks to George Orwell, we had something to look forward to instead of, the Armageddon. We had these, good-looking, flashy, talented young guys that represented America and dominated and brought home all this gold. Yeah, it was very easy. So they had a huge bankroll. And to be honest with you, I think they were already sponsoring most of them. So it started prior to even the get-go as the sponsoring the end of their amateur career. as I know they were sponsoring Pernell. I'm pretty sure they're sponsoring Holyfield also.
Smart
and I'm
move.
pretty sure they already had their hands on Breland, because he was really the cash cow in the beginning, because everyone thought he was going to be the next Tommy Hearns.
Yeah, man. I mean, hey, smart moves, man. Smart moves. So in you said you wanted to go to March 87 when he takes on Roger Mayweather. Mayweather by that time had already lost a couple of fights. Where was he at in his career to be pit up against a guy like Whitaker, who was only 12-0?
Well, he wasn't really at a crossroads yet, because he had a great comeback at 140, but it was in between the title run at 130 and 140. If you remember in the Chavez show, I mentioned the fact he probably should have gone straight from 130 to 140 pounds where his legs were stronger. Alex Wayu made a comment that in the pre-fight interview with Roger Mayweather, the one they do off camera, that he talked about the fact that 135 was difficult for Roger to make, but he took the fight because he wanted the money and he wanted the exposure. And so, and then they also talked about, well, you have the good boxing skills. Do you think you could possibly teach this guy some moves? Mayweather went straight in and said, no, I want to knock him out. So he had the height to reach the experience, the knowledge, the trainer. Because remember, I mentioned he had Jesse Reed as the trainer. He had everything he needed to go ahead and try and make an upset by using his skills. And he decided with weak legs to go toe-to-toe with Pernell Whitaker.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I made a mistake. Whitaker was 11-0 going into the fight, but hey, close enough, right? I'm sharing the screen with you, by the way, because we're going to be watching snippets of the fights. Like you said, Chief, actually quite a bit of a interesting take. Mayweather, despite his experience, was only 25. He'd already suffered losses to Chavez, Logridge, an upset against Freddie Pendleton, but he also had some good wins. He could crack, like you said. He was a tall guy who knew how to use his reach. That's a pretty dangerous fight for a 23-year-old Whitaker. The Duvas were that confident that he was going to be able to surmount that, or were they banking? Were they banking on cracking his chin?
They were, yeah. I think they thought that his chin wouldn't hold up. They knew Mayweather rather well, even though they never sponsored him or anything else like that. They knew, they dealt with him. They had other fighters fight with him. They worked with him in the gym before, so they knew what they were getting into. Even though I don't know how many of their fighters went up against him prior to, because this was before Vinny Pazienza fought him. But they knew the weaknesses that he had, and but they also had, like you said, a lot of faith in Whitaker. They also knew that the southpaw stance was going to kind of even things out a little bit, because Roger's really good against the right-handed fighter, but once his jab is reduced to kind of a pawing situation, his right hand was good. All they had to do, Georgie Benton was a really smart guy, and he was the main trainer for Pernell at the time. He knew, look, just all we have to worry about is one punch. Your stance is going to nullify his hook and his jab. He's not going to land him very cleanly very often. You've got your own jab to nullify his. So all we really have to worry about is the right hand. And Roger threw it pretty well. He threw it to the body and he threw it to the head a good bit. And some of them were landing, but it was kind of like Valdez against Shakur Stevens. It became a sellout punch instead of a power punch, because he couldn't get his left going. So he had to use it as a jab and as a power punch, and then try and work everything off of it. And Whitaker, after a while, could see it, could time it, knew what was coming, knew he didn't have to worry about a hook, knew that he had the foot advantage. It wasn't an easy fight for Pernell, but it was not one that really in hindsight, they didn't need to worry about it. They were going to have to work hard, but they weren't going to have to worry about losing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Double L in the chat says, "Damn, Whitaker low blowed Mayweather." We're gonna get to that, by the way. The low blows, a constant.
We're gonna get the low blows. Yeah, and who's Mr. Passive? We're gonna get to Whitaker's low blows. I'm calling you out.
Exactly. Yeah, but it's interesting. You mentioned the Mayweather fight, because if you're watching this fight for the first time and you watch all of it, you will conclude. I mean, for anyone that's never watched it, Whitaker was trying to close the distance, because, like you said, I mean, staying in front of, even though he had the Olympic accolades, the speed, the boxing acumen, staying away from Mayweather, long range, that would have been bad news. So he decided to take the fight to him, And I mean, I think I told you this before, Chief, that Nigel Collins, who's a very knowledgeable boxing writer,
Yep.
after Whitaker lost to Trinidad, we're going to get to that, spoilers, but he said, I gained respect for Whitaker because he finally showed grit. He finally showed what we wanted to see, whether he had heart or not. And I understand what he meant, because it was rare to see Whitaker in a fight, have to come back from a behind in the scorecards and all that. But in this fight, I thought he showed grit. I mean, he did,
especially this early in his career. This was definitely a test of, I don't know about digging deep, but this fight is not going to go your way scripted wise. You're going to have to try and win this fight. Some of his other prelim fights were, he was so much more skilled than the other fighters that he didn't have to try very hard. He just had to go through the motions. This was one he definitely had to work for. And even though I don't know how, quote unquote, digging deep and grit, Roger didn't come to lay down. Mm-hmm. Roger wanted to win this fight. He just didn't put himself at the best advantage by negotiating it at like a 137 or something. I think it was a 136, but Roger wanted to be at 140. He took the fight on, I don't know about short notice, but he did take it on the fact that he was planning on campaigning at 140 pounds. But like you said, Whitaker did close the distance. He went inside. And when people talk about him being a great body puncher, this was a very good example of that. He really did punish for the power that he has, limited as it may be. He did show a decent amount of punching power to Mayweather's body.
Yeah,
and belt line.
Yeah, he's really, digging. I mean, he's digging down on his shots. That was one of the people talk about his jab and his straight left, but to me, the thing that always impressed me about Whitaker was that left hybrid uppercut, like a shovel hook to the body, because he really did. I think that's how he wore guys down and got the respect. Here, he's trying to knock out Mayweather, probably like we said, because he thought, okay, Mayweather's been stopped about 4 or 5 times. I can probably do it. But you can see right away in the beginning of his career, Pernell Whitaker ain't no Chavez. I mean, he did drop Mayweather hard, but he's failing to replicate what all the other guys previous to him did to Mayweather, and that is knock him out cold. Chief, the other thing I wanted to talk about was for a 11-0 guy, Whitaker's pretty multidimensional. I mean, we know at this point he can box from the outside, keep guys turning. And he never really was a runner, by the way. We're going to get to that. But now here we see him fighting on the inside, close quarters.
Yeah, lightweight, he was a complete fighter. He didn't have the pop to go with the rest of his style, but he was never one of my favorite fighters, and I'm being objective here, though. He was still a complete fighter at lightweight. And I think this was one of the fights that showed it. Certain fighters, how would he have done against this guy? I mean, who knows? Mm-hmm. But he would have been difficult for anybody based off the fact that, remember how slick we remember him at welterweight. He didn't fight that way a lot of lightweight. He stood his ground against a lot of these guys.
That's right. And as we're going to see later on, though, like you said, this fight wasn't easy. I mean, on the scorecards, you look at the scorecards, you think, oh, it must have been just another Whitaker dominant win. But we're going to fast forward. I know there's this sequence you want to talk about with the Roger Mayweather's trunks, because this fight is legendary for that.
Well, when I first heard about it a long time ago, my friend Kevin Wright, who was top welterweight in the nation at the time, told me the story that Whitaker slipped in, pulled his pants down, and slipped back out. That's not what happened. Whitaker got caught with a good right and was on Queer Street and went to hold on. Like you and I have talked offline, liked to grab around the leg and dip below the belt line, which is illegal even in the pros. And in this case, he was ducking down that low to survive, and Mayweather's trunks were already being addressed before for being a little bit low, and Whitaker pulled him down in the process. But he straight up knocked Whitaker down. He caught him with a good right hand. And here's the thing that kind of makes you wonder, if that fight would have been in a weight that Mayweather was comfortable at and he lined it up right, because the right hand that staggered him wasn't directly on the chin, and it still hurt him. So that's more of a test to Mayweather's power than it is Whitaker's chin, but he still lined him up, and you got to think about if he would have approached the fight and used his skills to his best attribute, would the outcome have been just as dominant for Whitaker, or would have been a tougher fight? Bottom line is it doesn't matter, because Whitaker just put in too much early work, and this was one thing that happened late, as you just saw right there. It was a good right hand, but it wasn't like right on the chin, and it wasn't dialed up and lined in. Dialed up and lined up, is what I think I was trying to say.
Again, we got to remind people this fight was at lightweight. Like you said, Mayweather should have, in the beginning, you said Mayweather should have moved up to 140 earlier, but that's what it was. Whitaker showed grit for a young man. I mean, he tried to go for the gusto throughout the fight, got hurt, showed that he could survive from being hurt. But again, this is the type of fight you look at it. Somebody who's never seen Whitaker before and has heard all about the legend, they could say, well, I don't see what's so impressive. He's getting hit a lot. Yeah, but he's getting hit a lot because that's what the type of fight he wants. He believes he can knock out Mayweather. Now, as you can see here, he's a little bit more in championship rounds. He's fighting more in his usual style now because he knows he can be hurt. But in the first 8 or 6, 7 rounds prior to the knockdown, he was actually trying to stop Mayweather. So we're starting to see the building blocks here of a potentially great lightweight.
I don't think he was fighting exactly the way that Georgie Benton wanted him to fight, but because I'm pretty sure Georgie Benton wanted him to be hit as much in this fight. But you have to remember one thing: this is Roger Mayweather, who's going to win another title eventually, make several defenses of it, and was already a world champion at junior lightweight, and was a top-notch amateur. He was a consummate professional. If you look at Mayweather's record, Rogers, that is, he fought everybody in boxing. This isn't a slouch he's fighting. He's fighting a guy who's at mid-career having trouble making weight situation. And that's not to take away the win for Pernell. It's just to say the fact if he's getting hit a lot and it doesn't look that impressive, it's because he's fighting in his 11th fight, like you said, a consummate champion.
That's right.
If you're thinking that this isn't impressive based off of the aesthetics of what you're watching right now, remember the fact you're not getting the whole context because you may not know who Roger is. This is a solid opponent he's fighting. And the fact that Roger can punch and he's going toe-to-toe with him like this actually shows a lot for defensive fighters. Sometimes people say are defensive because they don't trust the chin. He took Roger's punch.
That's right. Absolutely right. Whitaker ended up winning this fight by unanimous decision. There you see him with his little grappling. We're gonna get more. We're gonna get to that as we explore some of his other fights. Before we get to other fights, so he ends up winning this fight by unanimous decision. I believe it was for a regional title. I want to mention right off the bat before we continue that his trainers, Lou Duva and Georgie Benton. Georgie Benton, yeah.
No, I'm agreeing. Yeah, that's who they were.
Yeah, and Georgie Benton, for people that don't know, they probably do know who Georgie Benton is, or at least I've heard the name because of the YouTube videos out there, was a contender, lightweight or welterweight, I forget.
Well, he fought Hurricane Carter at middleweight, so he ranged between those areas.
Right, yeah, but, back in those days.
He was on Black Murderers Row.
Right. Very modern style for the time, rolling with the shot. People compare it to James Stoney, whom he was associated with later on in his career. And again, but I forget, he never won a title, right?
No, like I said, that's what put him on Black Murderers Row. Black Murderers Row was a number of African-American fighters that were too good to not enough, too much risk, not enough reward. Him, Charlie Burley, a couple of those guys were on there. Mark and I talked about this once. Ezra Charles was on it until he won the heavyweight title. That's what should have actually removed him from that list. But he was just too good for his own good.
There you go. And so for him to be there with Whitaker was a good defensive fighter mentoring another good defensive fighter. It seems like a match made in heaven. So Whitaker had that. He had the Duvas behind him from a promotional standpoint. This fight against Roger Mayweather was on ABC's Wide World of Sports, I believe. If it wasn't Wide World of Sports, it was certainly on ABC. Then we moved to France, Chief. His first world title fight, March the 12th, 1988, against the very tough Jose Luis Ramirez. This fight was in France, I believe. What can you tell us about the build-up to this fight?
Well, let's start with the fact that of all the people he wanted to go after around the time to get a title, it wasn't Hector Camacho, it wasn't Julio Cesar Chavez, it wasn't other top fighters there. It was Ramirez, who was always kind of like the tough secondary guy that wheeled his way to title shots and title wins over the other guys. Like your Terrence. He did pull off a win against Rosario, but Rosario had also beaten him once also. So that win is kind of like a 50-50 on accomplishments. And at the end of the day, what we're getting at is the fact that that this is the guy they wanted to go after the world title for, not an undefeated Julio Cesar Chavez, not a Hector Camacho, not an Evan Rosario. This is who they wanted. So there was, I think, my personal opinion. Well, first of all, I've said many times over in the chat that as great as Pernell was, and I'm not going to say he wasn't great, I do believe the Duvas protected him. Again, they didn't go after Chavez, Rosario, and all those guys. They went after Ramirez, a slow, old, aging, 100-plus fight veteran, fellow southpaw, and slow of foot. This is who they went after. They picked him. So that being said, also in this fight, this particular one, not the rematch, this one, you compare what Chavez did to Ramirez, Hector Camacho, and even Boom Boom Mancini compared to Pernell Whitaker in this particular fight. My personal opinion, and people can say I'm biased, go right ahead. Talk to me offline anytime you want to about this. They all looked better in their performances against Ramirez than Whitaker did in this fight.
Interesting.
Camacho too. Camacho also fought Ramirez.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. So people look at Ramirez's record in this fight. Again, 88. They're about, this is where Ramirez was doing his business in terms of boxing, or his best work. His record was 101 wins, 6 losses, and I don't have his knockout ratio, but I believe he was somewhere around 80-something knockouts out of 101 fights. At this point, Whitaker is 15-0, so he's tallied a couple of wins since the Roger Mayweather one. It's for the WBC world title, which Ramirez had won off the aforementioned Edwin Rosario. And Ramirez was a seasoned veteran. He'd been knocked out early in his career by the legendary Ruben Olivares, one of Olivares' last major wins. He went the distance with the great Alexis Arguello, even dropped him. He got outboxed by Mancini. He lost the first Rosario fight, very, very close. Some people say he should have won that one. And he was completely outboxed by Hector Camacho, which, by the way, like you mentioned, Hector Camacho ended up dropping him in that fight, whereas Whitaker, as we're going to see, wasn't able to put a dent on him. And it's interesting, Chief, that we talk about Whitaker not being a runner, but in this fight, the first Ramirez fight, would you say he did
was
indeed?
Here. He was here. Was here. Definitely. I don't think he took a forward step the entire fight.
I mean, because I was rewatching this fight earlier just to again have a little bit of a feel for it. And Whitaker, one of his best attributes was that he would make you miss by keeping you turning, by shuffling around you, and of course, like I said, dipping below the waist and all that. But for the most part, he was always difficult to hit without running. In this one, he never stood still at one moment for more than a second, which some people could say, yeah, that's smart. But like you said, when you compare it to what other guys managed to do against Ramirez, this wasn't necessary. Do you think this is what cost them the fight, or?
Absolutely. I mean, even though this was in France and they judge fights differently there, I'm going to put it very much like this. Ray Mancini was able to bounce on his toes, move around, use angles, and throw Ramirez off, who, by the way, was an orthodox fighter, meaning Mancini. Why couldn't Whitaker do the same thing? Why couldn't this future all-time great that's known for his footwork and everything else, why didn't he do that in this fight? Because if you see in the rematch, the way he fights the rematch, given Ramirez is a little bit older and has some more miles on him by this time, especially because he goes 11 rounds with taking punches from Chavez, he's still hang on a second. Whitaker still, like you said, it's almost like he was backing up so much that when Ramirez would try his double jab left hand, that it seemed as if the two jabs were knocking Whitaker out of the way because he was already moving backwards, and then there wasn't that he was missing with the left because he was knocking Whitaker out of range.
Interesting.
It appeared that way at some times.
Yeah, I mean, Whitaker had the flashy combos, but you don't see him landing either that clean. I mean, there he landed a left, but Ramirez, see that there may be a body shot, but Ramirez just kept coming. And, I still think Whitaker won the fight, but for people who say that it was a completely whitewash, I mean, it weren't the Duvas. I think it was in the 7th round, or I think they told him, we need these last couple of rounds. So,
yeah, they were telling him that the fight was close. And then they did the same thing here that they did with in the future that we'll talk about with the De La Hoya fight of crying robbery of a close fight that really wasn't that convincing of a win for him. And you know the saying, you tell a lie long enough, people start to believe it.
Right.
I'm not going to say Whitaker clearly lost this fight. What I'm saying is that it wasn't the robbery everyone made it out to be. Your shoe shining to elbows and forearms and gloves. You're not landing anything that's knocking the sweat off of his head, really. He's coming forward the whole time. He is landing his jab relatively regularly, even if he's not landing body shots and overhand lefts. He's still landing effective punches, knocking you off balance. And when you're retreating the whole time, these jabs knocking you off balance make it look like he's knocking you off balance.
That's right. That's the negative aspect of constantly moving, is that the judges at some point don't know if the guy's moving because he got hit or because he just keeps on moving all the time. You know, you're not giving the judges aren't going to give you the benefit of the doubt if you constantly move. And again, I'm not saying that Ramirez won this fight, but unfortunately, that's the way these fucking judges look at it. Is if a guy's, you know, especially in the 1980s, this ain't the post-Mayweather era where some of these judges are infatuated with movement. These guys in France, and by the way, here's the other thing. When I talk to certain people, when I used to talk to certain people on the internet about this fight, they said, well, Ramirez was on the WBC Platinum plan, meaning he was protected by the WBC, which granted, him and Chavez did get a couple of, this is considered a gift from the WBC, which I could see happening. But again, the way Whitaker fought, I'm sorry, I'm not a fan of this style, and I think he did it to himself.
I agree, but for the conspiracy nuts out there, Ludwig did make the comment, the fact that this was a questionable decision, quote unquote, and then not long after, what happened was there was a unification fight between Ramirez and Chavez. So I don't know where Don King was involved when it came time for Ramirez's career, but after this quote unquote questionable decision, like I said, there was a unification fight, and Don King was involved in that unification fight. So I don't have more to say on that than that, because like I said, I'm not trying to say that it was fixed for any particular reason. It's just that is something that was a factor afterwards. So they very well may have been, hey, you know, if it's close, this fight's going to make more money. The next fight's going to make more money. And I'm also pretty sure they knew the fact that if Whitaker would have won, they were not going to go after Cesar Chavez right then.
Well, I mean, see, that makes a modicum of sense. Now, I don't remember this. I haven't seen this fight in a long time. Didn't really feel the need to. But didn't Whitaker also particularly slow down? Like here, we're seeing a lot of clinching. This is the championship rounds. Didn't he significantly slow down in the championship rounds?
And that's where Ramirez got some work done on the inside.
Yeah, so
was trying to work free with his free hand and stuff like that. So that's where the rounds probably closed in a little bit more. Again, I'm not trying to say Whitaker shouldn't have won the fight. I just didn't see this robbery that everybody else claimed. I saw a close fight that I'm not even going to say could have gone either way. But Whitaker didn't. Again, Ray Mancini does not deserve to be mentioned in the same sentence as Pernell Whitaker as far as lightweight's concerned. And he completely outclassed a younger, more prime Ramirez. Convincingly.
Yeah, I mean, again, because people are going to say, so why bring this up at all? Because, again, we're not talking about whether he won or not. That's not the argument. The argument is, if you're dealing with these judges, what do they like to see? And unfortunately, Whitaker didn't put a stamp on it. I'm not saying that you necessarily have to do that. Again, that's one of the frustrating things of dealing with judges. Is that, and we're going to see that with the Chavez fight too, that a fight can be competitive, but you can still have a clear winner. And in this fight, I thought Whitaker did sort of edge it, but it just so happened that the judges enjoyed seeing the aggressor coming forward, and they didn't give Whitaker that many credit for his slaps and his shoe shining. That's just the way it happened. So Whitaker ended up losing a decision. By the way, shout out to Official Scorecard Boxing, a.k.a. Steph K Boxing, who says, Whitaker Ramirez 1 took place in the arena of my old boxing club in suburb of Paris, Les Valois. Oh, interesting. Wonder if that's okay. So that place is still, yeah.
Shout out to Sven, my buddy, and nice. That's a fact you never told me before.
Exactly. Yeah. Interesting. All right. So Whitaker ends up losing this fight. It will be the first of many times he cries robbery, and the fans go right along with it. But I mean, hey, listen again. He should have. I haven't seen the whole fight in its entirety in a long time. So my recollection is that he should have won it. but he did himself no favors by constantly retreating. Again, we're going to bring up the whole thing about with the Chavez fight. I want to reference the Lomachenko-Haney fight, where, again, a whole bunch of people cried robbery, and a minority said, no, it wasn't robbery, it was a close fight. But in that scenario, you had a guy, Lomachenko, coming forward and getting the fight taken away from him, whereas in this one, you had a guy who was constantly moving backward, getting the shaft. And again, when somebody moves constantly like that, I'm sorry, like Chief said, Mancini didn't have to do it to beat Ramirez, and he's nowhere near as accomplished a fighter as Whitaker. So what happened here? Maybe Whitaker was injured. Maybe this was the plan that Duva and Georgie Benton conjured up. Because again, maybe they saw what Ramirez did to Rosario, and they said, well, we don't want to get caught with something, so let's play it safe and move constantly and keep Ramirez off balance. But that didn't work out, and so they had to go back to the drawing board.
But they didn't quite do it the right way. There was a way they could have still done that, and the shoe shining would have been part of this situation also. My personal opinion, sitting here now, without fully studying it again, is usually they would have been able, because Whitaker usually fights right-handed fighters, he would have had the correct angles to be able to throw these combinations, not be in harm's way, not worry about something coming back at him, and getting an angle that's going to benefit him. He's fighting a fellow southpaw here. And so the angles he would normally have to be able to throw some of these shoe shines that would probably land a lot easier. I don't know how many southpaws he faced in his career, but this one wasn't just any southpaw. This was Ramirez. This was a guy that knew what he was doing, and he knew how to fight. And so, and like you said, he ended up knocking Rosario out, and he knocked Rosario down. The power, they knew this.
Right.
So the idea behind it was, like you said, we're going to try and play it safe, but the angles are different. And I just don't think they had the right plan to put it all together for him to be able to shoe shine his way. And I think they thought the punches were going to be cleaner and more showy, and they were not. And I think the game plan may have been a good game plan. It just wasn't executed well.
Well, I mean, that's what rematches are for. And by the way, lest anybody has an overwhelming sense of pity for Whitaker, as we're going to see later on, he ended up getting the close nut in some decisions as well, in some fights. So you win some, you lose some, and you some controversial decisions go against you, and sometimes they go in your favor. So that's still something down the line. Whitaker ends up working his way up to a title shot against the always tough Greg Haugen. This in February 1989 for the IBF lightweight title. Haugen at this point has a loss to Vinny Paz, but he also has a win over Paz, as well as wins over a French contender Freddie Roach. Of course, we know him as a trainer later on, and Jimmy Paul. I do forget, how did Haugen win this title? Was it off Jimmy Paul or?
Might have been off Jimmy Paul, but I think it went back and forth between him and Pazienza also. Like that was a title changing hands here and there. And to be honest with you, I just don't remember the history of that trilogy of who had the title first and who won it off the other. But I think you might have been right. It might have been off of Paul. He lost to Pazienza and then won it back from Pazienza, if memory serves.
Okay,
yeah.
So yeah, he won it off. He won this IBF title off Pazienza. I'm looking it up now.
Okay.
There you go. Yeah. Okay, so we get to the Haugen fight. Now, Haugen, again, for people who've never seen him fight, how would you describe him?
Tough man. Has good solid fundamentals when he wants to use them, but his toughness, he's kind of like Jeff Finnick. For those of you that remember 80s and 90s boxing, good punch assortment, just really tough man. And his toughness, he wills himself to wins because he throws big shots, kind of like was it Jesus Chavez that fought Mayweather and Morales. Throws big punches, but they don't have a lot of pop behind him. He's just a strong guy that's very tough and brings the fight to you. He outwills a lot of his opponents, like he did Camacho. He outwilled Camacho, and that's how he beat him.
By the way, real quick, Chief, somebody's not getting it. Montbrink in the chat says, so you want Whitaker to dumb down his style to not win the fight. I think he missed what you said, Chief, that what's his name? Ray Mancini didn't have to dumb down anything. He still won convincingly. The point is the point is you don't have to run. There is such a thing as running in boxing, and judges don't appreciate it. They don't appreciate the clowning either, as we're going to see later on from Whitaker.
with all respect to the comment, he's not picking up what we're saying. No one is saying that he has to stand there and draw a line and let you swing at his head all day. That's lesser fighters that were known to be like that looked better against Ramirez than Whitaker did in the first fight. I mean, I don't know if I can say it any more clear than that. That fighters that were not as talented as Pernell Whitaker looked better doing what they did in boxing Ramirez than Whitaker did in the first fight. So if he has all this talent, if Ray Mancini looks like the world-class boxer against Ramirez, about doubling his hook, staying on the outside, turning him the whole time, using his jab, pivoting, if he does all this stuff to just totally outclass this guy, and a younger Ramirez, why didn't Whitaker? That's the question you should be asking us, and we've answered the fact we don't know. It didn't work out well.
Yeah, we've heard this argument before where people go, "Oh, so you want him to slug it out?" It's like, why does it have to be either or? Why does it have to be running around the ring or slugging it out? That's not how the world works. There is a gray area. You can do a little bit of both. You don't have to
Just
run
use
around
the
the ring.
anger.
I don't
And
think
he didn't use them. Yeah.
Well, hopefully
Go ahead.
that clears things up. Hopefully that clears things up for him. But we got to keep moving here with the Haugen
Yes,
fight. Like you were saying, very good technical fighter. But it seems to me it was a type of fight that Whitaker excelled in. A guy who's not that big a puncher, not as fast as Whitaker, and obviously not as good a boxer as Whitaker. So Whitaker could really shine in these type of fights.
Yeah. I'm not going to say he was handpicked. I don't know how the rankings went about for him to get the shot at the IBF. To be honest with you, the way, if memory serves, how things turned out was probably the situation of that was the belt that was left because Chavez and Ramirez were fighting each other and they didn't want to sit around until, one of the belts opened up, especially since they didn't know what Don King was going to do with Chavez. There was a lot of opportunity for Chavez at that weight at the time, and they could have shut him out. So they went after the next belt, which was the IBF. I'm not saying he didn't have a number one ranking. I'm just saying that was the easiest path for them to still get a championship. So they went that route. And again, a tailor-made opponent. Now, whether they wanted that tailor-made opponent, because, let's face it, Terrence Ali was around there. There were other contenders that could have fought for them to look good to make a case for a title shot. But slow of foot, right-handed fighter, somewhat, I won't say clumsy, but not the best footwork, easy to hit. It was tailor-made for Whitaker. And but like I've said before, in certain situations where people are like, well, this was supposed to happen. Right. When you're in a fight that you're supposed to win, you need to look pretty freaking good doing it. And Whitaker did exactly that in this fight. He blistered the daylights out of Greg Haugen this fight. And for the record, a peak Camacho fought Haugen. Peak or prime Camacho fought Haugen a few years later and did not look as good as Whitaker did in this fight. So again, when we're doing the triangle theory of this guy looked this way against this fighter, this person looked this way, if Camacho was supposed to be this flashy left-handed fighter with speed and power and everything else, he was not able to perform, and also a fellow southpaw was not able to do the same thing that Whitaker did. In Camacho in two fights couldn't do what Whitaker did in one. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, and by the way, Quags brings up a good point here that Whitaker had pretty strong legs. And, if you watch his fight against De La Hoya, De La Hoya is a bigger guy, but he's coming up in weight, as we're going to see later on. But you can see Whitaker has strong calves. And I think that's what helped him be able to move and keep guys turning for all 12 rounds. And here in this fight, you're also seeing him dig that left hook to the body that I talked about, that shovel hook. Really got some, he loaded up on that. And I think that's how, it reminds me a little bit of Winky Wright, another southpaw from later on, who wasn't the biggest puncher, but he would get people's respect with body shots and keep him off of him, or he kept backing them up with it. And that was the same thing with Whitaker. It's like, okay, you want to jump on me. Once we're on the inside, I'm going to pelt you with these left hooks to the body and these right hooks to the body, and you're going to feel him.
Yeah. He was a very lightweight, definitely. He was a very good body puncher. The higher weight classes we'll talk about later. He still throws the body, but it's a different method and a different strategy when he moves up in weight. But at lightweight, I tell you what, somebody else that fits another southpaw situation, Lomachenko. He's not bad to the head, but he's really good at digging to the body. He really commits to those body shots. And but being that power shot, when they lean over to really throw that cross shovel hook to the body, that's near the liver. And so that's their power punch going to the liver instead of their lead hand. So something tells me that can be a debilitating shot, even if they don't have a lot of power. Attrition goes a long way.
By the way, this clip here is see he was grabbing Haugen's leg. This is something that he did throughout his career. On top of the rest of the clowning, the dipping below the waist. He said in an interview that he felt like he had to entertain people, that he had to really put on a show sometimes. I think maybe that had to do with the fact that he couldn't really crack as much as other professional fighters, but this is all still still improper. So I mean, I remember one of the first things that they tell you in amateur boxing here, at least here in Canada, is don't clown. Judges hate it, and you never know if you're gonna find a judge who's biased, and he goes, you know what? I don't appreciate the clowning. I'm gonna give this round to the other guy if it's a close fight, especially. So Whitaker, I mean, that's part of the arrogance, a little bit of Whitaker that, we talked about it a little bit with Chavez. Was that?
There was plenty of that.
Yeah, that's what, Chavez could be arrogant too, he's contemporary. But Whitaker really had a contentious relationship with the media. And then on top of that, his fights were relatively uneventful. I mean, you look at this Haugen fight, I understand why somebody would have been bored by this, because every round it was just the same thing. It was just Whitaker hitting Haugen flush, not hurting him, but just completely dominating round after round. In other words, it was devoid of drama. And there's a lot of casuals out there or even hardcore boxing fans who aren't big fans of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to say things when it sound like you're not trying to dog Whitaker.
Mm-hmm.
Just the fact that he didn't have. When you don't have power, you usually make up for it with volume and excitement. And his excitement was dropping his hands. It wasn't sticking the tongue out, because that was more of a Freddie Pendleton thing, who we're going to get to later. But it was definitely, like you said, it was clowning. It was almost making fun of his opposition. And he referred to himself often as an entertainer more than a fighter. And, the situation is that you wanted to see more sometimes. You felt like he left something in the ring, because you couldn't tell if there was just dumping water over his head or if he really broke a hard sweat. It didn't look like he tried hard. He didn't have to, because he was really better than a lot of the fighters he faced. I have to admit that he was. But sometimes you were just, when you were done watching, you're like, I kind of wanted more.
That's the nature. That's the nature of any slick boxer. In the beginning, you're like, wow, look at those skills. But then you sort of, as a boxing fan, you start to get used to it, and you go, okay, I want to either see somebody like this monsters sort of guy test his skills, or I want to see him fight a guy who's just as good as he is at boxing. Because then at this point, it's still early in his career. This is his first title fight. But there will come a time where he's out boxing this type of guys. You go, okay, we've been there before. You really need to throw a challenge. And again, that's not Whitaker's fault to a large degree. I mean, it is what he was. He wasn't a big puncher. He wasn't I dare say, Chief, Mayweather, especially at 130, 135, was flashier than Whitaker, because he was just more explosive with his offense. And you could tell that, you could tell that the crowd would ooh and ah at his shots, whereas Whitaker, it's almost like he would land flush, but then the audience would realize pretty quickly on that the guy wasn't going anywhere, his opponent, and he just, like I said, the rounds looked the same, round after round after round.
What was like Ivan Calderon down at 105?
Yeah.
You made the comment before, like, you'd watch about 5 rounds, you get up and, go talk and go to the kitchen, fix something to eat, come back. Now you're in round 8 and it looks like round 4. It was very much like that with Whitaker in some of his fights. And for all the talent that everyone was talking about, I remember this is a time when Ray Leonard isn't done yet, and Duran's still around pulling off upsets. Then you've got Evander Holyfield, Mike Tyson, Julio Cesar Chavez, Terry Norris is on the rise. Felix Trinidad is not around yet, but and neither is De La Hoya. But we've got this, the Camacho's around. You've got all this talent of flash, flamboyancy, power, and everything else. And then you've got Whitaker, who's solidly skilled, just like the rest of them. But when you're done, when it's over, there's nothing. Like, you could have blinked and realized, blinked for 2 rounds and woke up and saw the same thing still going. And it's not to try and take away from him. It's just the fact that it seemed like there was no urgency to try and impress people. Mm-hmm. It was, I'm going to fight this way because I know I can win. And I don't care if it doesn't impress people, because Whitaker's arrogance, I'm better than all these people and I'm better than them. So I'm going to, I fight how I fight.
Well, I mean, in this scenario, I don't overall, I don't fault him for fighting the way he did because, I mean, again, against Ramirez, the first fight, yeah, he did run. But against Haugen, he wasn't running. But I'm just saying the reality is most people will not be attracted, even if the guy's not running. If the guy's just outbounces his opponent, but he's not doing any substantial damage, then people will say, oh, it's like, well, okay.
And these two fights, though, excuse me, not these two, because we mentioned three. In the Mayweather fight and the Haugen fight, he had some really good moments when he really let his hands go and blistered Haugen pretty good and floored him pretty hard somewhere in that fight. Once he had the fight in the bag, it seemed like he very much just trying to put it on cruise control. And that's kind of what the guy didn't belong in the ring with you. Can you do more to him? Can you bust him up? Can you cause a cut? Can you do something to try and make it to where this guy is going to fold? And if it's because you think he's too tough to fold, then are you just going to are you going to submit to the fact he's too tough for you to take out, or are you going to try and prove him wrong?
Right.
The really great fighters try to prove that tough fighter wrong. Whitaker didn't do that.
Well, I mean, I don't think it was necessarily absolutely. He was under obligation to do so. I mean, you can fight the way you want to fight.
Nobody is.
Well, what I'm saying is he can fight the way he wants to fight, but then don't complain. Oh, how come nobody wants to see me fight? It's the reality. Most people don't understand what you're doing. They don't understand that what you're doing is great. It's like I keep saying, boxing is a form of show business. You got to show the people something. And like you said, he was content with going the decision, which again, it's his right. But then that's why he never became the big star that some people expected when he turned pro. Now, in this case, we're fast forwarding to August the 20th, 1989, taking on Jose Luis Ramirez, the rematch in Norfolk, Virginia, his hometown. Chief, this is a legendary fight because not only for the revenge factor, but he was accompanied by his Olympic teammates. We just saw Holyfield there leading the crowd or leading the procession. What about this fight? He finally he managed to do what he was supposed to in the first fight.
Well, first of all, politically, this is interesting because he was the IBF champ going in to fight for a vacant title for the WBC. Vacant's usually number one and number two contender.
Right.
So just throwing that out there, that somehow or another, this became a unification fight for a vacant belt. Just throwing that out there.
And I forgot to say that Ramirez was coming off the Chavez loss.
Yes, he might have had a few fights here and there, but his last title fight was the Chavez loss. So he just lost, and yet he was in a unification fight for a vacant title. Just saying. Moving on. Whitaker looked amazing in this fight. As much as it sounds like a dog him, he did putting truth to power. Ramirez is a borderline about to be shot fighter. He's definitely well past his prime. He just had taken a nice set of lumps against Chavez. By this time he's fought Rosario twice, Whitaker once, Alexis Arguello, Boom Boom Mancini, Hector Camacho, and Julio Chavez, not to mention Terrence Ali and other good fighters. So and he has well over 100 fights, and he's over 30 years old. So it's not like he's taking on a triumph champion. But like I usually say, when you're taking on someone who doesn't belong in the ring with you, you need to show the fact they don't belong in the ring with you. Even though he didn't do it with punching power, he did it with skill. Ramirez was literally clueless, lost, and didn't know what to do with him in this fight. And I think Georgie Benton really got his hands on him by this time because Whitaker was way slicker in this fight than I'd ever seen him before.
Yeah, I mean, he's not slugging it out like that person said in the chat. He's not throwing the game plan out the window. He's just not running anymore, making it an even more conclusive win.
Remember, like I said, he liked to take that side step and then pivot. He did that a lot in this fight. Even though he's fighting a fellow southpaw in this one, not a right-handed fighter, he's still getting it to where he's making it. All right, Ramirez rushes in just there, and then he just throws a combination. And even though not a lot of it lands, look how Ramirez had to bounce himself back into balance. Whitaker did everything right in this fight. He couldn't get a knockout over Ramirez. That is not a knock against him. Most people can't. But he looked as good in this fight as those other guys I mentioned did against Ramirez. Also, it just took him a second fight to be able to get that way. That's kind of my point in the whole thing.
Well, speaking of the Camacho,
I think Whitaker should have been able to do this in the first fight, and he didn't, and that's the big problem.
Well, that's why I said earlier, maybe he was just following the game plan. They thought, well, listen, we can't take a risk this early in our career against a heavy-handed guy like Ramirez, even though Ramirez wasn't really a one-punch knockout guy, but maybe they felt that way. And again, maybe perhaps he was too green, because again, it looks, what he's doing here looks easy, but you have to be an all-time great and have all-time great ability to be able to dominate a guy for all 12 rounds, and that's exactly what Whitaker sort of dialed down the movement a little bit. See, he's not running constantly. He's just slightly moving and countering, making him miss, making him pay.
And a lot of times he's making it to where he's just outside, just close enough to where Ramirez thinks, okay, I think I'm close enough to hit him, but he steps back just enough to make Ramirez reach, and then he steps in with the counters.
Exactly.
And then, then this exchange we just said right there at the 12-second mark, around 6, he put a nice combination together. And he used his hook a lot in this fight. He used the hook to the body. He doubled up with it to the head. He didn't really flurry with it, but he did a lot. And then, of course, that sequence right there at the 217 mark, he blocked all of it. I probably would have enjoyed his career a lot more if he could have tried to put these kind of performances together more often against the fighters we wanted to see him with. And I'll get to that later.
Well, yeah, I mean, here Ramirez, I don't fault Whitaker for being unable to drop or stop Ramirez, because Ramirez was one of the all-time toughest guys. He was made out of tree bark. Again, Chavez dropped him, but we talked about that in the Chavez episode, that Chavez seemed to take it easy on his old sparring partner here. But again, I think the only guy who ever stopped Ramirez was Ruben Olivares. Early in Ramirez's career, when he was one of those inexperienced fighters coming out of Mexico, really green, turned pro as a teenager, fighting a former world champion. So I don't fault Whitaker for being unable to stop Ramirez. Ramirez, just even Rosado managed to drop him, and Ramirez just kept on coming. So no shame there. And Whitaker really dazzling the crowd here with, look at those type of shots right there. And Ramirez's weak point was always fighting guys with speed. So maybe that's another one of the reasons why Whitaker looked exceptionally dominant in this fight. But he did manage to right the wrong from the first fight, or at least the perceived wrong, and managed to get himself 2 titles. Amazingly, like Chief said, this is a unification fight with a vacant title, but hey, it's boxing. What do you expect? Anything else you want to say about this fight, Chief?
I mean, as for the things that I'm going to say a lot about Pernell Whitaker in this show, I got to give credit where credit is due. This is the performance he should have done in the first fight, and if it would have been a better start to his career, of like the anointing to the greatness he was going to ascend to. That's about all I got on that part.
Well, he's got 2 titles, and we move on to one of his defenses. Now, the reason why some of you are going to look at this fight from February 1990 against Freddie Pendleton, and you're going to go, out of all the Whitaker fights, why are you focusing on this one? Especially if you look at Pendleton's record coming into this fight, 24 wins, 16 losses. And you're going to think, why are we watching this? Let's get to the fucking Chavez fight, the Buddy McGirt fight. Well, this is what is part and parcel of being an all-time great. You got to defend your title, and you got to get up for these defenses. You can't just say, I'm going to take it easy. It's not a big name, whatever. Freddie Pendleton was a tough guy, strong lightweight. Despite what his record said, he was a seasoned guy. He had wins over Roger Mayweather, a stoppage win over Roger Mayweather, Sammy Fuentes, and Livingston Bramble. Now, this was after Bramble had beaten Mancini. Now, I think Bramble had lost a fight or 2 after Mancini, but the point remains, it wasn't a Livingston Bramble, a young Livingston Bramble or whatever. It was a tough Livingston Bramble. So this is the type of fight that really shows you whether a guy is an all-time great. Can you keep the consistency and the momentum against a guy who's tough, but who might not, you might need a little extra motivation to get up for. Chief, you got anything to say about this fight?
Well, Pendleton was one of those fighters that kind of like Toledo, and there's a guy that Toledo fought early in his career. I don't remember his name. Mexican warhorse, even though Pendleton's not Mexican, but warhorses that are much better than their records. I don't know his humble beginnings very much. I knew there was an article on him in a magazine, but I don't have that magazine anymore. I just know that he didn't start off with the same management giving him a certain amount of money per fight, making sure he's matched right. He was taking fights he could get to make a living, and his record showed it. But he also worked his way up to giving one of the greatest lightweights the greatest lightweight of his era. You got to got to give credit where credit's due. There wasn't a better lightweight than him because nobody beat him there officially. Excuse me, not officially. You know what I'm saying? The Ramirez fight aside, the first one aside, when he won once he won a belt, nobody beat him there.
Interesting.
So, as champion, Whitaker did not lose a fight at lightweight. Moving on, Pendleton was I won't say an excellent fighter, but he was very tough, very skilled, and pretty well schooled. And he was coming into his peak in his prime right around this time. I kind of have a feeling Whitaker looked at the record and said, "Yeah, we got this."
Mm-hmm.
And it was not a walk in the park. It was, first of all, Whitaker's style is, I'm going to go 12 rounds. The problem when you're going to go 12 rounds is the fact if that guy's there for all 12, you've got to make sure he doesn't have any moment to come back in that 12. And Pendleton, all I can say is he just tried really hard, landed some good shots, and made Pernell look somewhat ordinary. Because remember, 16 losses, this should have been like an easy class out fight. On paper, we know better than that, but most people, especially back then, remember, there's no internet back here. So if you haven't seen Pendleton fight before, you're just seeing a guy with a barely 500 record taking on the Olympic gold medalist and possibly quote unquote pound for pound fighter. And he's already on the list by this time, by the way, in history.
Mm-hmm.
And you're getting extended and challenged by a guy with 16 losses. That was the perception of the performance when it was over.
Right. And it's deceptive because people have probably also noted the fact that he's wearing the Pendleton is wearing the gold and red. And yes, indeed, he is a Kronk fighter, or at least associated with the Kronk gym back when it meant something. And not everybody could hang in the Kronk gym. And that's what Freddie Pendleton was certainly tough enough to do so. And he's pressing Whitaker here, but you said Whitaker sort of looked ordinary, but again, I don't fault him for that. I mean, he still dominated, and he still won pretty convincingly. And this is the type of fight that especially for a 12-round fighter, a guy that goes 12 rounds in most of his fights, like Whitaker does, that takes a lot of wherewithal, a lot of concentration. And like I said, one of the hardest things of being a professional fighter is the daily grind. These 2-3 month training camps where it can get mundane. It's easy to lose track, and we're going to get to that with Whitaker because he did end up losing track later on in his career. But here, he's fighting, like I said, a guy with a deceptive record, strong lightweight, Kronk Association, and he's just going through the motions. Just, okay, it's muscle memory. Okay, I got you, going to counter you. I might have to eat a couple of shots, but I'm going to land more often, and I'm going to make you work hard to catch me. See, and that's the other thing about Whitaker right there. He caught a right hand, he ate a right hand, and then he came right back with a 3-punch combo. He had grit. He had determination. He had that all-time great quality, which was, you hit me with one punch, I'm going to try to steal the play away from you. I'm not going to let you take the momentum away, even if it's just one shot. He wasn't like, let me take this one shot and I'll get him next round. Nah, he's like, something activated in his brain. And not everybody has
He
that.
did. He usually tried to answer back, especially when you stunned him, whether it's with a clean shot or whether he got angry and did something funny. Love those quote unquote belt shots right there too. Again, so we're not even to the Chavez fight, and we're already noticing the fact that maybe it was a Duva trick on how to throw the body that Andrew Galata fell for. Maybe it wasn't just Andrew Galata.
You're right, yeah.
Well, remember Mildred Taylor when he fought Chavez. I know we're not talking about that career, but Chavez had a nice broad belt line during that fight. It was really high with the elastic and everything. Taylor hit him with so many quote unquote borderline shots. It bent his belt over to where you could see Chavez's navel, and the rest of those belt line shots were clearly under the navel. And what do we have in common? A Duva fighter again. Duva, Joe G. Benton actually told Jim Lampley, we're going to have Taylor throw shots to the hip and below the belt, quote unquote, hip and below the belt, to throw Chavez's timing off. And Whitaker did this a lot throughout his career also. Now, I know I was just talking about Taylor, but same company. And then, of course, like I said, Andrew Galata, same thing with Riddick Bowe. There's a repeating pattern, and the thing that is all in common in this is the Duvas. Just throwing that out there.
Rapak Striking Company in the chat says, Chief knows his boxing. Absolutely. Shout out to the Chief for being here on this show. Hopefully everyone's enjoying it. Don't forget to hit the like, hit the like, hit the like. Jay in the chat says that's the Philly street fight style. Well, I mean, I know Whitaker wasn't exactly from Philly, but I don't like the
But
dark
Georgie
cards.
Benton was.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
Georgie
Yeah.
Benton was. That was his trainer.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't like the dark cards, especially when a guy initiates them when he doesn't need to. But again, it's the professional ranks. That's the type of world that we're working with here. And so, hey, if a guy hits you low, you got to hit him low back. But some guys don't do it that way. So Whitaker ends up beating Pendleton, defends his unified titles right there. That's a standard Whitaker fight right there, just showing you a little bit of everything there. We move on to May 1990, the same year that Chavez and Taylor tangoed for the fight of the decade. And Azuma Nelson, one of the all-time greats, legendary for coming out of nowhere and giving then featherweight champion back in 1980, I want to say, Salvador Sanchez, all he could handle. Sanchez had to rally back to stop him, and thereafter, Azuma Nelson ended up having a legendary career of his own. He ended up stopping the great Wilfredo Gomez, ended up catching a bunch of other accolades. He had 2 wins over Mario Martinez, Jim McDonnell, and
Fennec.
well, yeah, that would come later, but yeah, because at this point he was a little bit past his peak. He was 31-1, but I think he was 32 years old, and again, had already had a long career. I think I remember the HBO commentators sort of saying like, "Oh, at his best, Nelson can do this and that." So they were sort of already intimating that Nelson wasn't at his best. But I gotta tell you, I think he fought a pretty good fight here, Chief. What do you remember about this bout?
He fought the best that he possibly could. We got to put things in perspective a little bit when it comes time to Azuma Nelson in this fight. And again, this is not Pernell Whitaker's fault, but Azuma Nelson at the world title level or the upper echelon level of fights at lightweight had a losing record. So this wasn't his best weight class. You can clearly see when you see just like the width of the shoulders and the back, Whitaker was just a naturally bigger guy. On the tail of the tape, it looked like it was even, but we just look and you can just see the difference in size between the two guys. Nelson did everything he possibly could, and just, I'm not sure size was the total difference, but it was a factor. But it's something I need to point out when it comes to most of these lightweight fights.
Mm-hmm.
There were not a lot of not welterweights. There were not a lot of southpaws to begin with at a world-class level to spar with, let alone ones like Pernell Whitaker to spar with to get you ready for a fight with him. So you're usually winging it in the ring because, whereas we have, probably, we've got Usyk, and Loma's no longer in the top pound for pound, but he's still in discussions for title fights if he wants to. We've got 2 guys in the top right now within boxing, let alone, and then Tank Davis. So I've just named 3 southpaws on the top of my head. Back at this time, you had Galaxy down at 115, and you had Whitaker. That was it. So a lot of what's going on is the fact that he was a gifted fighter, but the southpaw stance was not an excuse, but it was a reason that he was very successful. People couldn't figure it out, and he didn't give them a chance to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
His jab was good. Like you said, the ducking below the belt there, but he's ducking punches. He's not supposed to leave his chin up there, so he's slipping hooks there. And he didn't, when he grappled, it wasn't always tying up an arm. It was, all right, I'm getting you close and I'm just doing enough to keep you off balance, and then I'm going to fire. So it was still skillful. And again, this is just it's not Whitaker's fault he didn't have any power, because he was tattooing Nelson at times. Look at that stiff jab he's knocked his head back with.
Mm-hmm.
2 more body shots. He's given everything he's got to these punches. Azuma Nelson is a tough guy with a good chin, and Whitaker doesn't have a good punch. But he completely outclassed him. And this slippery guy that we saw, oh, look at that nice hip shot.
You with the hip shots.
Oh, another one. Look at that. Look at that. Go figure. Lou must be proud looking down from heaven on that one. Anyway, point being the fact that it's not his fault he didn't have any power. He did the best he could at lightweight. He did try to fight. He didn't stand his ground because he was a mover, but he didn't, like you said, didn't run. He's moving back because he's giving himself punching room. He's keeping the distance to where he can control the action. He's not running out of punching range. He's keeping Nelson back far enough within Whitaker's range, but not Nelson's range. That's boxing.
By the way, shout out to Rafael Garza for his contribution via the Buy Me a Coffee app. Shout out to Rafael Garza who says, Chief es verga. I don't know if he means it as a compliment. That's sort of like verga is, well, I don't know if I can say that on the show, on the air, but he's referring to a certain body part. But I think he means Chief es chingon. Chief has been chingon. So I think that's a compliment right there, Chief. Shout out to Rafael Garza.
Shout out to you, regardless what that means. And BDA, if you can translate after the show, I'd appreciate it.
All right, I will. But
I
yeah,
don't
you know what?
French.
The French. But Azuma Nelson, yeah, he was at his best at featherweight and super featherweight. Here he is fighting at lightweight. But you see, Whitaker won this fight. Some people feel like the 115, 113 scorecards were a little bit too close. Or that weren't representative of how dominant Whitaker was in this fight. However, your Chief pointed to something, which is that the lack of power from Whitaker, and you're starting to see something that we're going to see later on. When he fought the best guys out there, they didn't respect his power. So Whitaker had to make a miss and really outwork him. I mean, he's working hard here. This isn't easy to do. Constantly backing up and throwing shots. And again, he's not running the way he was against Jose Luis Ramirez in the first fight. This is a more seasoned Whitaker here. See, he's still in punching range while moving backwards. But Azuma Nelson he was a guy, think about it. People say, oh, Whitaker was from the ghettos of Virginia. Azuma Nelson was from the slums of Ghana. I mean, he makes, he makes that makes the fucking the ghettos look like hotels. Well,
forgive me for putting it this way, but there's no food stamps in Accra, Ghana. And
yeah.
I'm not trying to make fun of a ghetto situation in my country of America, which I love, by the way. But the poorest person here is richer than the poor people in other countries like Panama, like Accra, Ghana, like other countries. I've seen the poverty. I'm a world traveler. I've sailed all around the world. I've seen poverty. Now, I've never been to Accra, Ghana, but I've been to Cologne, Panama. I promise you, the poorest people there are nowhere like the children of the poor people in this country are richer than the people in Cologne, Panama. The poor people, that is.
Mm-hmm.
So the slums it may have been tough neighborhoods, and I'm not taking anything away from Pernell when it comes to that. That economic prosperity versus toughness of a neighborhood are not always hand in hand the same thing.
Right.
And I live near downtown Norfolk. It's a rough area. So he came from that. But when you're talking about the toughness plus the poverty, Whitaker didn't have it as rough financially as Azuma Nelson, I promise you.
Well, the professor, Azuma Nelson, considered at worst, the second best boxer to ever hail from the African continent. Some people would say Dick Tiger is the best fighter to hail from Africa. Nevertheless, Azuma Nelson, lest anyone think that Azuma Nelson was past it or he was shot in this fight, he did end up giving Jeff Fenech hell in the first fight. And again, the excuse from Nelson was that he was suffering from malaria. And I think it's believable because he ended up fighting Fenech, rematching him in Australia, in Fenech's hometown or home country, and ended up being the crap out of Fenech and stopping him. So Nelson still had a lot left in the tank, and Whitaker wasn't going to stop him. He wasn't going to slow him down. He was going to have to work for it, and that's what he did. Again, I keep talking about having to go to the office time and time again and prevailing. This is another case of Whitaker having to go all 12 rounds and really working hard against a guy who didn't stop coming. Again, this takes a lot of energy, a lot of wherewithal. We'll see him stalling. By the way, I think there was a point where Whitaker again, I forget which one it was, grabbed Azuma Nelson's leg, where there you see him doing a little bit of the wrestling, or trying to at least. But hey, you got to do what you got to do, right? So
this might have been the first fight also where he did the behind the back shot.
Yeah.
His head was down, and he did it in 2 fights, and I think this was one of them. Let's put things, because we've been dogging him a little bit. This fight, looking back on these highlights, he fought harder than I remember him fighting when I first saw it. Azuma Nelson, though, was a featherweight. So this is a natural lightweight. There was a lightweight in the Olympics and a lightweight as a professional, fighting a man who was in his 30s as a featherweight. excuse me, moving up from featherweight, who was now in his 30s. He was not a shot fighter. He may have been towards the end of his career, but he had a lot of wins after this, like you said, significant ones too. He had other title fights at 130. There was the Azuma Nelson gift that he got, Nelson that is, but he came back and won it. He was a master of the rematch, let's put it that way, because all the fights that he had after that were controversial, he came back and won all of them emphatically. Most of them by knockout.
Yep, there you go, man. And by the way, you were dogging.
And Whitaker beat that guy, so that's got to say something.
Yeah, and by the way, you said, we're dogging Whitaker. You were dogging him. I'm giving him complete credit for everything. You're the one that's being unfair. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, but, what you told me to do, but when we were, I'm just joking.
Yeah. No, but yeah, I mean, listen, he fought a difficult fight against Zuma Nelson. Nelson kept, and like I said, Nelson ended up beating Fenish in the rematch, beating the crap out of him. He also had some good fights against one of the Reles brothers, Chicanito Hernandez, Jesse James Leija. I think they fought like 60 times or something. So this was a world-class.
None of those fights were at lightweight.
Right.
We got to put you have the credit where credit's due. Well, you also have so Whitaker did not need all those rematches that all these other guys did. He did it once easily, outclassed him the entire time. There was no need for a rematch. But everything we're talking about is Zuma Nelson right here that was great, that showed what a great fighter he was. None of that was at lightweight. It was all at 130, and that has to be pointed out that Whitaker's two best wins at 135 pounds were against featherweights.
I mean, listen, people can get mad at you for pointing it out, but they can't get mad at the fact that it's a fact. You know what I mean? I mean, it is what it is. It has to be pointed out. I wanted to give a special shout out to Vintage Boxing. That's the I was playing clips from that fight that Vintage Boxing posted. Fantastic quality for this fight.
Oh yeah, they're good. Yeah, if you look them up on YouTube, they're good. They got good quality. Most of it's high def. It's good stuff.
Yeah, 60 frames per second, 1080p. I don't know if this guy's remastering them or I don't know if he's upscaling them, but man, what a great, that's a great thing about YouTube. You can find some of these fights. Some of these fights you used to have to torrent them in horrible quality, sometimes 144p. Well, I'm exaggerating, 240p. Now you get them 1080p, 60 frames per second, just outstanding quality. So shout out to Vintage Boxing for posting this type of, and there's other channels out there too that do that too. So shout out to all of them. Chief, now we get to the fight that got Whitaker all the titles, and this is quite significant at that time because this is 1990. 1990. He's taking on Juan Nazario, and
it was a triple header.
Who else was on that?
It was a triple header on HBO. It opened with Meldrick Taylor against Primo Ramos that he almost lost in the last round, but he dominated the rest of the fight. Then it was Hector Camacho against Baltazar. And then the main event was this one.
Interesting. Quite a card. The interesting thing about this is that Whitaker, I haven't really seen too much of Nazario. I looked him up today. He'd lost a fight early on against, who was it? Mark Breland, I think? No, it wasn't Mark Breland. That was Pineda. I forget what Nazario did. But anyway, he had a title. He had the WBA one. And again, you got to keep in mind, this is 1990, back when 3 titles is still a bit of a novelty. So, Chief, you take it from here, because I don't know much about this fight. It's one of my least watched Pernell Whitaker fights.
Well, I mean, I didn't know much about Nazario either, and I knew of Whitaker because of the Nelson and the second Ramirez fight in live time. I don't remember if I saw the Haugen fight live or later. So we're getting to the Nazario. All I know about Nazario is that he had some roundabouts with Edwin Rosario.
Yeah.
So his early loss was to Andreino Arello.
Drano.
I'm pronouncing it completely wrong. I'm butchering it because I talk like a Southern white guy and not because I have a Spanish.
Well, I don't even know who the guy is, so I don't know if you're pronouncing it correctly or not, but go ahead.
Adriano, Adriano, and then the last name is Areola. So that was his first loss, and we're talking about Nazario because, of course, Whitaker's only got one controversial loss in his career to this point. Then he loses the TKO loss to Edwin Rosario, but then gets a comeback fight against Rosario and wins the WBA belt, as BoxRec doesn't show you anymore because they don't like the WBA.
No.
And so then right after that, and this is back what I make my point about Whitaker. When Rosario got that WBA belt back, why didn't the Duvas offer big time money? Of course, Don King had something to do with it, I'm sure, and the Duvas and Don King didn't like each other. But you never heard him call out Whitaker. I mean, you never heard Whitaker call out Evan Rosario like, "You're next, you're who I want." Blah, blah. He might have mentioned him in an interview. I'm not going to say he didn't mention him at all. But it wasn't like there was a big push to make that fight. And so what happens instead? Evan Rosario fights Nazario, loses, and now we have a major fight for big money that never happened because the Duvas didn't try to make that fight. They picked up the other guy instead.
Interesting.
They went for the WBA after Nazario picked it up. They didn't really make outlandish offers out front in front of everybody prior to that. And that's my point about Pernell Whitaker when it comes to Duvas. Not Pernell himself, the Duvas. And how the Duvas handled his career.
Yeah, we differentiate between the fighter and what the promoters and handlers do.
No doubt in my mind that Whitaker would have taken that fight if they would have offered it to him. I have nowhere in my words am I going to say he ducked that fight or ran from it or didn't want it. I just don't think the Duvas tried very hard for it. And so, like I said, though, it's funny how they weren't trying for it until Rosario didn't have that belt. Then they went after it. But point being, this was very uncharacteristic because Whitaker got not just an uncharacteristic knockout, he got a first-round knockout.
Yeah, very uncharacteristic. The other thing I wanted to say is that, well, the Rosario fight, one of the reasons why the Rosario fight might not have happened is we saw what happened with Roger Mayweather and what was going to happen later on with some other long, rangy guys who had a good right hand, good right hands. Maybe that's why Whitaker didn't, or the Duvas at least, didn't want to put him in there against Rosario. They didn't want to put him in there against a guy who had a good right hand.
If Lou were still alive, he'd definitely say that Don King was part of it. Maybe they couldn't negotiate. Maybe Don King, they didn't trust it would be a fair shake. I can't comment on that part of it, but I know Lou would have said something about that. The point, though, is that we're going to find in certain situations where opportunities could have happened with fighters, and those fighters did happen to be promoted by Don King. They didn't go for the Duvas didn't go for those fights with Pernell until they had to, or they didn't go for him at all. We'll address them later. This one in particular, they didn't go for Rosario, but they did go for Nazario. And it was a left hand that caught him, and it was very weird. I've never seen anything like it. He caught him with the left hand, and then Nazario went to take a step forward and fell and couldn't get up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm waiting for the knockout here. It's about to come. Well, let me fast forward a little bit. Quite a what's the word? A resonating weight.
Good body shot there.
Yeah,
that was it. It's a big wide left cross that he didn't see coming, but he takes a step forward and then he falls, and then he can't get up. It's just weird because Whitaker was never known for anything like that. Couldn't do anything like that before, and I don't remember him doing anything like that again. For the record on Nazario, he was. Let's see here. Where are you? Going to BoxRec. I want to see how many times he was stopped in his career to kind of give an idea of, he was stopped 3 out of 4 times.
I mean, he got caught right on the button. Southpaw versus southpaw. That's usually a great way to line up the left hand.
Yeah, I'm sure he didn't see it coming based off the fact he's used to fighting right-handed fighters also. He's coming forward, as we see here. Jab, overhand left that he didn't see, caught him on the side. Yeah, that was a good shot. It really was. It was just
quite
funny
a resounding. Quite a resounding way to capture all the titles. By stoppage. Now at this point, he wasn't fighting the best lightweight at the end there. But I mean, it was there again. The result couldn't have been better. First round stoppage, and now you got all the belts. The lineal lightweight champion.
He is now in the driver's seat.
Now, what's going on with Chavez at this point? This is 1990, so Chavez is already a junior welterweight, right?
Had already beaten Meldrick Taylor. Because remember, this was because Meldrick Taylor was having his first fight after, or his first major fight after, against Primo Ramos on the undercard.
Mm-hmm.
What month was that fight again?
Let me see. It was in
It was in the summer.
August 1990.
August. Chavez was having a non-title fight against Russell Mosley. Chavez's next title defense would be December 12th on the undercard of Mike Tyson, Alex Stewart against Kenduk On.
Okay, now you've said that from the before, like okay, that the Duvas didn't really. You've said that there was some careful matchmaking. Again, were there any talks for Whitaker Chavez at this point?
Whitaker was pretty open about who he wanted to fight next, and he was talking about how he wanted to fight Chavez. It wasn't like he was calling him out, going, "I want him," but he was saying the Whitaker Chavez fight is. He was very nonchalant about it, almost as if he deserved it. And but I never heard Lou afterwards going, "Yeah, we tried to talk to Don King. Yeah, we've made offers. Yeah, we've." There was never any of that talk. It was just always Whitaker mentioning his name after the fight. But then you look at the situation. I'm going to open 2 box recs here. The fact that Whitaker would call him out, but stayed at lightweight, like didn't move up and try and. Like what Tommy Hearns did when he lost to Marvin Hagler. The first thing he did was fight the number 1 contender to get ranked again right after that loss to get a rematch. So he beats Nazario, calls out Chavez, fights Anthony Jones, calls out Chavez, fights Paulie Diaz, calls out Chavez, fights Jorge Paez, calls out Chavez, fights Harold Brazier in a non-title fight, calls out Chavez, fights. So I want to go over the rest of his career, but he does all this stuff all the way up to 1993. Like any real convincing that they're really trying to make the fight because he's staying down at lightweight while he's making these challenges. Whereas Chavez has got Hector Camacho and Roger Mayweather, and he's got numerous other fighters to fight. Whitaker's not the top of mind because he's a lightweight. At this time, Chavez is being talked about possibly fighting Simon Brown. If Azuma Nelson would have beaten Whitaker, that would have been a fight that Don King wanted to try and make. There were situations where there was plenty on the plate for Chavez right there. So Whitaker wasn't. People looking at in hindsight of what Whitaker became versus what he was at the time, he was behind Chavez. He was a step lower. Even if people liked the skill, financially, draw wise, box office wise, pound for pound wise, ranking wise, he was second chair at most.
Well,
he was gaining ground. He was gaining ground, but he wasn't ahead of Chavez in any category to try and demand a fight. He was going to be the B-side of that negotiation situation. I think he was when the fight finally happened. But in real time, for what we're talking about, he may have been starting to work himself into the conversation, but there were other things ahead of him.
Right, I can imagine. I mean, at this point, what does his record indicate that he's better than Chavez, and especially when it comes to business? I mean, how's he going to be? But then again, he's at lightweight. Chavez is a junior welterweight, so I can understand why that was still an obstacle for that fight. We move on now to October 1991. He takes on the aforementioned Madomero Paez, tough Mexican contender. Has wins over Calvin Grove at this time, Troy Dorsey, Luis Espinoza. Again, don't let his record fool you. This is a tough guy. In some ways, some people have compared Paez to like a little bit like the Mexican Whitaker. Obviously not as talented, but he was
not nearly as elusive.
Yeah, not nearly as elusive, but quite athletic. He used to work in a circus. And from what I understand, he used to delight boxing reporters in the lobby of hotels by sticking needles through his palms or tacks. I forget what. So he was a little bit of a maniac. He's considered one of the boxing's greatest characters, which you need. And as you can see by his attire right there, quite a flamboyant one as well. Chief, what do you recall about this fight?
Well, let me wrap up the way Chavez was on this situation. He was also the undefeated unified champion at that time at junior welterweight, whereas Whitaker was still lightweight. So to close that out, that's kind of where this was like a growing potential for that fight. It wasn't like a major fight waiting to happen at this moment. Moving back to Paez. First of all, again, about Paez, like we said about Azuma Nelson, a really talented fighter at featherweight. He never won another world title, major world title. He did win the WBO, I think, at junior middleweight. I mean, not junior lightweight. But he never won a major belt for a long number of defenses after. He had a lot of good fights, a lot of high entertaining fights, especially out at Arrowhead and the Great Western Forum, and sold out that arena all the time. He was always on Fox Sports in front of a crowd of 25,000 sold out. So good character, made really good money, was really fun to watch, but wasn't a lightweight. And he tried in this fight. He tried hard. And Whitaker, again, in this fight and the fight just before this against Paulie Diaz, he didn't have to try and back up much. He actually went after these guys and kind of fought in the trenches with them. Oh, another hip shot. And another one. Good gracious. He can't miss that hip. I'm telling you now.
Come on.
Most accurate hip puncher I've seen. Anyway.
Jeez, Luis.
All right. Fairness to fairness. Paez, though, was no slouch. Tracy Spann was a very good contender after Whitaker left. Was a high prospect, a lot of knockouts, really good fighter. Paez beat him. So Paez was no slouch. And this was an older Paez after Whitaker. So he got himself ranked up in the lightweights a lot by pulling off some really good wins. So to say that, oh, well, he just beat a featherweight. Well, he did beat a guy whose title wins were a featherweight, but he was a force to be reckoned with. You had to be an upper echelon fighter to beat him at lightweight, which Whitaker obviously did. And it wasn't close. I mean, scorecards may have been somewhat close, and Paez may have had some moments where he flurried a lot, but he couldn't crack Whitaker's shell. He couldn't figure Whitaker out. Whitaker, threw great right hooks to the hip. Body. But look at that combination. He just kept him at bay, controlled his movement, and he just clearly outclassed him. Paez was too small, too short, not long enough reach. And Paez also didn't really know how to use a jab. And they noted that in the pre-fight when they're going over the stats. I think he threw average 9 jabs around. You're not going to beat Pernell Whitaker without a jab.
Right.
And so,
yeah.
Go. No, that's it on that.
I mean, one thing from a technical viewpoint that I am impressed by, like you said, Paez undergunned, outsized, but he's still, look at him, he's still coming forward. He's sticking to Whitaker like glue. And that's what I was saying about this guys. If he fought guys, Paez was never, he's not even in the discussion as one of the all-time great or top 20 great heavy Mexicans of all time. But he had world-class toughness. And you can see that to him, Whitaker's shots ain't nothing to him. Again, this is a little bit like the Zuma Nelson fight where Whitaker's going to have to work in this one. And, you're saying Paez had a jab, but he landed his share of shots. He was very explosive. Look at him just making Whitaker work. It was an entertaining fight. I dare say one of my favorite Whitaker fights just because Paez made it entertaining. He never stopped coming.
But it was because Paez made it entertaining.
That's what I said, yeah, because,
sorry, I can't help but count all these.
Yeah, you can't help it. That's going to be the second episode. We're going to do the hip count.
Nah, it's just a conversation I have with Passive in the chat a lot. So I'm taking every opportunity to put it out there. Anyway, point being though about Whitaker, you're right. He stood and fought this guy. He went at him. He pushed him backwards. He really outfought him. It didn't just outbox him. He outfought him. When you start to talk about Whitaker against the other great lightweights, so of my lifetime, that's going to be Duran, Chavez, even though he was there briefly. Some people are going to throw Mayweather in there, even he was only there briefly. And I would probably have to say Shea Mosley. Now, you're talking about 2 featherweights that went right at him and took the fight to him, and he couldn't fight them. He outboxed them, and he outworked them with his activity, but he couldn't back them off or hurt them. Now, you're talking about Duran, Chavez, and Shane. What's going to happen? You're either going to have to move way more and fight like he did against Ramirez, or you're not beating those guys. I'm seeing a guy who's very talented, who's very good in a lesser era. Because let's put it this way: Whitaker's the only moneymaker. Nazario, Nelson, and Paez are your biggest wins. This is not his fault. The lightweight division diluted by the time he got to the championship level because Camacho and Chavez and some other fighters had either lost and fallen off or they moved up in weight. You can only beat the guys that are in your era, and I can't fault him for that, but none of them were great all-time consummate threats to win a title, and none of them won a title at lightweight.
Right. Well, we can say, let's keep that in mind, because I want to fast forward a little bit here to some of the other fights, because I really want to get, to the Chavez fight, which we didn't really cover. I feel like we didn't talk about it too much, the Chavez Whitaker fight, when we did the Chavez episode. So let's fast forward here to the Pineda fight, Rafael Pineda, that is. This is from July 1992 for the IBF Junior Welterweight title. Chief, why did Whitaker move up at this point? Had he done everything he needed to at lightweight, or what was going on?
Yeah, there was not. Well, one, he might have had trouble making the weight by then. I don't remember those words being said.
Okay,
but had been there his entire career. He was approaching his late 20s. And he could easily move up 5 pounds. Not to mention Chavez was there. Hector Camacho was there. There were other challenges there. And to be honest with you, Paez was pretty much the cherry on top for anything he could have done there. There was nobody else of saying, hey, this guy's on the rise. Hey, look at this guy. Can't wait to see him against Pernell. There was nobody like that coming up at that moment. So there was nothing else for him. Unified the division. Rosario was gone also. Rosario, I think by this time, had already won a WBA title at 140. So everything was at 140. There was nothing at 135 anymore. The title was vacated by Chavez when the unification fight between him and Taylor. Chavez vacated it, and Pineda won it off of Roger Mayweather. If I remember correctly, Pineda wasn't exactly winning that fight until he landed the big punch. I don't remember if it was a hook or overhand right, but it was a one-punch knockout. And so that sold the fact, hey, we want to see that fight next, because people want to see him again. The Duvas already knew what to expect with Pineda because of working with Mark Breland, and so they had him well prepared. And they came in, and Pineda, to me, at this point, was an underachiever, because if you remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, he had a brief comeback at welterweight where he gave Zab Judah a tough shot. He pulled off an upset against somebody. I forget who it was. And gave some guys some really tough fights for the WBO and around the welterweight weight limit. So he either came into his own, boxing got weaker, or Whitaker was just that much better, or a combination of all three. But again, Whitaker's taken on a big puncher and is not really worrying about what's coming at him. I remember him being not ferocious in this fight, but Pineda didn't live up to the knockout record that he had, because Pineda had a lot of knockouts coming in this fight. And of course, he knocked out Mayweather, Roger, that is, with one punch. So everyone's, oh, Pernell better look out for that power. It didn't show up in this fight.
Right.
Whitaker had him completely figured out, out-jabbed him, even floored him with a body shot later in the fight, and completely controlled the action.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it before about these Colombian guys, and there's a lot of Colombians here in Montreal. They're heavy-handed. I don't know what they eat over there, what they feed them in Colombia, but they produce some heavy-handed guys. But then when they get into the professional ranks, they knock out people over there in Colombia, but then they get over to more competitive markets, and either they don't have a chin, or they don't have the world-class skills. I don't know. They hit an impasse. And that was the same thing with Pineda. Tough guy. He knocked out Roger Mayweather, but at this point, who hadn't? Well, I guess Whitaker. Whitaker hadn't, right? But you get my point. Right. He was a big puncher. That was a selling point, and this is the type of guy that Whitaker could excel against, because he saw everything coming, and it was going to take a lot more than just a big punch to beat Whitaker. And like you said, he dropped him. He dropped Pineda. He outworked him and got himself another title in his second weight class.
So wrapping this up on my end, there's two things here. One, my late friend Clay used to tell me that when you're going to fight a guy like a James Toney, or Roy Jones, a Mayweather, a Whitaker, a Floyd Mayweather, that is, you're not going to get it with one shot. They are too smart for that. If you get them with one shot, they're either they're a shot fighter. They really didn't see it coming. That's about it. They just know they know enough about how to do the sport that you're not going to get them with one shot. So you have to put everything together. And Pineda, at this point in time in his career, didn't have the IQ to know how to do that. It was power only. And so, given he has a champion, he was a hard puncher. You got to give everything he was for what Whitaker fought. But again, they moved up. They didn't go after Chavez. They went after Pineda. They didn't go after Evan Rosario. They went after Pineda. There's a thing that keeps coming up here when it comes to the Duva fighters with Pernell, with the Duvas themselves, not fighters altogether. The Duvas in regards to Pernell Whitaker. They're not going after the Don King fighters. They're going after the other guys for him to get these titles at this point in his career.
You're
They
saying
didn't
there's
go
a
after
pattern.
Camacho. They didn't go after Camacho, who had already lost to Haugen, but was on a winning streak again. They didn't go after Rosario, who was a champion. They didn't go after Julio Cesar Chavez. They went after Rafael Pineda. So there's something about his career. You've got to give all the credit that you can. It's the Duvas that I criticize the most. They're the ones that are making the fights for him. Whitaker's not. He's not his own manager. Lou Duvas is his manager. He's not his own promoter. Dan Duvas is his promoter. So they're the ones controlling everything. And they're never the ones going after the most marketable, dangerous fighters each time they're going for their first title or something along those lines. That has to be pointed out. It's not his fault because I don't think Whitaker was afraid of anybody, but the Duvas aren't going after these guys.
Interesting. That's we're starting to see a pattern, which is something again that doesn't often get brought up with Whitaker. Again, most people when they think Whitaker, they think about the robberies against Ramirez and Chavez, and they think he was a woe is me type of character. But you're saying there was more shrewdness involved than meets the eye as it pertains to Whitaker's management. Well, we got to speed this up here because we still have a lot to get to. So let's jump from Whitaker goes from fighting a puncher, one-dimensional puncher, to a guy who's far from one-dimensional, and that is Buddy McGirt. This fight took place in 1993. And this is the first fight, as we're going to see, him against Buddy McGirt. Buddy McGirt coming in with a record of 59 wins, 2 losses, 1 draw, I believe. And this for the WBC welterweight title. So now Whitaker moving up to his 3rd weight class. McGirt has wins over Howard Davis Jr., and he looked like $1,000,000 against Simon Brown. He had lost to Meldrick Taylor a couple of years earlier, but I mean, that was no shame in that. I mean, that was a Meldrick Taylor that had dazzled and wrestled. Was that?
That was a peak Meldrick Taylor.
I mean, that was a Taylor that was drawing Sugar Ray Leonard comparison. So, no shame in that. McGirt did end up, like I said, rebounding and solidifying himself as a welterweight champion. Chief, I gotta go to take a latrine break because I've been drinking a lot of coffee. So if you could maybe just give us your thoughts on this fight, and well, I'll play it here. But was this again? We talk about the fights that went against Whitaker that were close fights. This is a fight, as we're gonna see, he actually benefited in such a close fight. Can you give us some breakdown of your thoughts prior to the fight, and so on and so forth?
So leading up to this fight, again, he had a unification fight, not a unification fight. He won a fight in the same weight class as Chavez, and instead of a unification fight, they went to Buddy McGirt next. Now, that's not a hit against him. All those wins, Buddy McGirt had picked his career back up after the Meldrick Taylor fight, was on a nice winning streak, and Simon Brown is no slouch. Simon Brown is a all-time great welterweight that doesn't get a lot of recognition based off the fact he didn't have the titles long enough to really, and he wasn't really mainstream attraction. So people didn't realize exactly how special it was that Buddy McGirt knocked him off that list. Simon Brown was on the pound for pound list. He was pretty high up there, solid guy, and he outboxed him clearly. So now what is Whitaker going to do against this guy with 50 plus fights with a high knockout percentage who knows how to box and is a really good fighter? Well, as it turned out, as the luck with Whitaker goes with certain situations, Buddy McGirt had taken this fight on clear notice, but noted before, I think it was a title shot before that, how he had already had an injured shoulder. And so he goes into this fight with, quote unquote, the excuse of not being 100%. So he can't throw the left hook, and that was his money punch. But he still had the jab right hand, and he was throwing the left uppercut on occasions. And his jab was still on point in this fight. So excuse versus reason, take it as you want it. I just know that Buddy McGirt had to try and compensate by not having his hook anymore. He gave a good run for it, but I just don't think he did quite enough. I don't think but a lot of people said it was really close. At the time, I remember some people thinking that off record, not like writers and journalists, but there were some people around that I'd been talking to and heard that thought that it was at least a draw, if not a slight win for McGirt. And they thought that the fight went the way it did because Jim Lampley had announced that they didn't tell Pernell this, but they already had a contract signed and ready to go for him to be fighting Julio Cesar Chavez in, I believe, September of that year. This fight was supposed to be a foregone conclusion.
Really?
Yeah, Jim Lampley talked about the fact that he said, and the Duvas haven't told him this yet, but so Larry Merchant's the one that broke it to Pernell in the interview, if memory serves, that after that win, he said, "Congratulations, you've got the Chavez fight." And so similar to how the Duvas thought that the Ramirez fight was a foregone conclusion to get to Chavez and Whitaker was just pushed to the side, some people thought that was happening here with McGirt. I didn't think it was a straight up robbery, but I did wonder what would happen if it was 100% Buddy McGirt, which we never got again. He never had that hook that he could flurry with again. This is not Whitaker's fault. Whitaker did exactly what he was supposed to do. You don't have the hook? Great. I'm going to neutralize the rest of your left hand. I'm going to neutralize your jab and everything else. I'm going to out jab you. I'm going to out fight you. McGirt gave a really good account of himself. He just didn't quite have all the tools he needed. And to be honest with you, even if he had the hook, that doesn't mean he would have won.
Right.
I'm not saying, well, he didn't have the hook, so he lost. I'm saying he didn't have the hook, and he had to reinvent himself as a fighter of just basically being a 1-2er after that, because his hook was never the same. But that doesn't mean he was going to beat Whitaker anyway, because remember, the Duvas had already faced him once with Mildred Taylor.
Right.
So they've already seen him in the ring live. They've already worked with him before. They had this advantage of they knew what he was going to bring to the table. So they'd already scouted out their homework. And not a foregone conclusion, not an easy fight. No excuses about the fact Whitaker didn't dominate, but he won competitively. And that's really all there is to say from here. McGirt did have a rematch clause, and Whitaker said he wasn't going to rematch him until he admits that he lost. There was a drama outside the ring when it came to that one. If I remember correctly, it took a while for this rematch to happen, not just because of the Chavez fight.
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's why I tell the people that think Whitaker was against the system and all of this and that, if the system was against him, they probably could have taken this fight away from him. I mean,
They could have easily. How much it would have gone to everyone saying it was a robbery if McGirt would have won versus Whitaker? The only reason why I say that they would have carried a lot of weight is because the Chavez fight was on the other side, and a lot of people knew that. A lot of writers and people knew that. Let me say, I won't say a lot of writers, because Jim Lampley made it sound like the Duvas told him just before the fight, like in the fighter interview when Whitaker wasn't around. So I don't know exactly how wide scale it was and how many writers knew about it. And Pernell's the only person that didn't know. But that was the next fight. It was the one that was on the table. It was the one that everybody wanted. And there was a lot riding on Whitaker winning this fight, because a loss would have knocked him off the pound for pound list. Maybe he made not off, but down. Chavez would have gone after Terry Norris instead and probably taken a severe beating. So there was a lot riding on this.
Right. Well, Pernell Whitaker, was that?
I didn't say anything.
No, I mean, well, that was a great breakdown of the fight and the what was to come afterwards. Whitaker ended up winning a unanimous decision and won his third title, or at least his another title in a third weight division. And this was in Madison Square Garden, by the way, back when they used to put shows in Madison Square Garden. We don't see them very often anymore. But this was in, like I said, March 1993, and Chief gave us an excellent build-up to what would come next. And that is a fight against Julio Cesar Chavez, long considered the best fighter in the world, although there were some, contenders for that crown. Terry Norris was right up there. If you counted heavyweights, I guess, suppose you could go with some of those guys. But this was the fight. And by the way, how come I don't have... Oh, yeah. I think that was one of the reasons why we didn't even play the fight when we were doing the Chavez episode, that the fight's not on YouTube. And I'm afraid that if I play it, we could get... I don't know. I'm going to play it anyway. I got my own copy, so I'll play it off. I was playing all these fights off of YouTube, and I'm going to play them off the copy that I have. Chief, so finally the fight gets made. Chavez is moving up to welterweight. What's the build-up to this fight?
Chavez was known to be the best fighter pound for pound. He'd done nothing but continue a solid winning streak after beating Mildred Taylor. including wins over Hector Camacho and beating Greg Haugen in front of 130,000 people, which had never been done before. So it come to the point, and of course Simon Brown had lost at this time, so that's a fight that Don King wasn't going to make. It got to be the four. These were the only two guys left of the superstars. They could have still made money fighting other guys, but it came time for a big fight. They were the only two left between 147 and 140. And so this had been waiting for a long time, especially since the Taylor fight. And it finally came, and the thing going in, especially for me, but after watching the Paez fight, they asked Paez what they thought of Whitaker and everything else. They said, well, who's going to? And they finished the interview with, what do you think is going to happen between him and Chavez? And Paez says something really quickly in Spanish, which the translator said Chavez will beat him. So I'm like, well, this guy said it himself. He'd been in the ring with Whitaker. He should know. As we can see, and as people have talked about, and as Dirk loves to mention, this fight was way more just trained to get in shape for the weight and didn't prepare. I don't know what it was, but Whitaker was a solid factor and part of this. Whitaker was doing the same thing. He was tying up. He was pushing back. If he used his shoulder to push back, I mean, Trinidad did the same thing to Whitaker when they fought, and I didn't have a problem with it. So
well, excuses. Well, you can call it whatever you want. You can really choose whatever word you want to address it as, but there's no doubt that there were a dozen low blows, blatant low blows there from Whitaker. Now, I want to, because I think we're sort of retouching some of what we said in the Chavez fight, so I think it bears reiterating here. I thought Whitaker won the fight, but you can win a fight, but it can still be competitive throughout. So that's the only thing I'm arguing is when people say, "Oh, Whitaker whitewashed Chavez," he really didn't. He really didn't. And again, there is a question about the low blows because they happened. And it's interesting that Joe Cortez, the referee, was a guy that was very adamant about inserting himself in a fight. He was one of those modern era referees who ended up fabricating his own catchphrase. I'm firm, but I'm firm. So he's making it about him. He's inserting himself as a character in the fight, whereas the old school referees, and it's an old saying in boxing, the best referees are the ones you don't see or you don't notice, with Cortez and what's his name, the judge, Mills Lane, and to a certain degree even Bayless, when they come up with their own catchphrase, what I say you most obey. Remember, guys, I'm firm, but I'm firm. Let's get it on. That type of stuff is like, I start to get very skeptical about referees. Joe Cortez was very hands-on, old-school referee. He even admonished Whitaker at one point in this fight. I don't know if I can find the exact round where it was, but and Cortez immediately rebuked him for it. It's like, hey, you don't fucking push me back. And Whitaker, you could tell Whitaker was testing the waters. He was sort of testing to see how much he could get away with. And Cortez rebuked him for it, but he never rebuked him afterwards for the low blows, which always seemed weird to me, Chief.
So let's put this out there, because this is the fight that really demonstrates it. It's not speech if you want to. This is how he acted on a regular basis. Now, I come from a state that at a time in Georgia, class took you along, and he if you fouled him, it'd foul you back. But he didn't. If the referee said something, he took the referee as, you're in charge. These are the things that a lot of people, not just me, I'm just the only one that you hear talking on YouTube. There's a lot of people that didn't like that about him. And it showed in this fight. When he was warned for the low blows, that's when he swatted at Joe Cortez's hand. Then when Joe Cortez went to warn him, he put his hands on him around his face and it was like, you don't touch the referee, period. So there was an arrogance about him that he did and exuded a lot in this fight that
well, yeah, I mean, that's the book on Whitaker is that whenever he would go to functions or whatever, or like I said, with the media, a very contentious relationship with those. Perhaps one of the reasons why, on top of him not being the most entertaining fighter, not the biggest draw either, even in his hometown. I will say, though, that we're talking about the Chavez fight. And again,
right, sorry,
I do. Was that?
I went off script slightly. Sorry.
No, that's okay. No, because I mean, we're talking about the fighter. I mean, if we're going to talk about a boxer, we're going to talk about his box office appeal or lack thereof. And in this case, we're explaining why Whitaker never really had the accolades or the acclaim that a guy like Chavez had. As it pertains to the Chavez fight, like, for example, Devin Haney versus Lomachenko. I thought Lomachenko clearly won that fight, but it was competitive throughout. But I just thought one guy was always one step ahead. Same thing, a little bit like another example that I give of a highly competitive fight, but that had a clear winner is Morales versus Pacquiao 1. Pacquiao never stopped throwing, he never stopped landing. But throughout the fight, Morales was just landing the harder head-snapping shots throughout. He was a bigger guy at the time. Pacquiao wasn't acclimated to 130 yet. So it is what it is. It happened. In this case, again, Chavez keeps coming forward, and I want to touch on the low blows because he did eat a lot of low blows from Whitaker, some blatant low blows. But Whitaker was never deducted a point for that. And you could see that Chavez slowed down. I mean, as soon as Whitaker started taking over the fight, he's after the low blows. And
he landed 2 in the 6th round. And then after Cortez finished warning him, and I don't think Chavez took a lot of time. The second they went back in, Whitaker started flurrying with his left and throwing combinations. And look, this is a man's sport. And as much as I like to try and say low blows this, low blows that, Chavez had a situation in front of him where he either needed to suffer from the pain or man up and win, and he suffered with the pain.
Yeah,
I gotta call it like it was.
And the other thing is, it's one of the reasons why I hesitate to just dwell on the low blows is this was a Chavez at this point who wasn't taking boxing that seriously, and that's on him. You know, that's his fault. Whitaker didn't sabotage his training camp. It was Chavez's fault. The fact that it was still a competitive fight speaks volumes about Chavez's abilities, though. And you know, again, he got hit with the low blows. He maybe should have retaliated. I don't know why he didn't. Long story short, Whitaker ends up, in my mind, outscoring Chavez in the later rounds. So if you go back to the early rounds, there might be some swing rounds, whatever. I think Whitaker clearly won this fight, despite the fact that it was competitive. I will argue that it wasn't a whitewash that people made it out to be, but I thought Whitaker clearly won. Again, we've touched on the low blows. They were what they were. In the end, it turns into a draw.
Yes.
The judges...
To be fair, Whitaker outworked him because what people don't give Chavez enough credit for, and this is not the Chavez show, it's the Whitaker one, I get it, but and ring generalship versus hurting him and beating him up and everything else. But at the end of the day, it took a long time for me to really learn how to study the sport and everything. When I finally sat down, I was like, yeah, okay, Chavez really did. But Dora is actually the one that reminded me that when the fight actually turned, and he was correct, it was in the 6th round after the low blows.
Mm-hmm.
The fight was competitive before that. And so I went back and watched it after Dora said that. And sure enough, after those 2 low blows in the 6th and then 1 in the 7th, that's where Whitaker took over. But like I said, you can man up and try and fight him back, or you can succumb to the pain. And it looks like that's what Chavez did in that fight, and Whitaker pulled out ahead.
Well, it turns into one of the most controversial decisions of all time.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. Oh, shit. All right. Hold on a second. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that the video, I was getting a message about the video we were playing. See, that's why I didn't want to really, that's why we didn't play the too much of the Whitaker Chavez fight in the first stream, the one we did with hold on, I think we're blocked, man.
Did they are we still on air?
But well, not right now, but I think we're temporary because we were watching the Chavez Whitaker fight. Hold on a second. I don't understand of all the fights, all the Whitaker fights are there, but
Except
for
that
some
one.
reason, was that?
Except that one.
Yeah, for some reason the Whitaker Chavez one, I think Chavez Camacho too is not on there.
It might not be.
YouTube.
I have them on my hard drive, so I don't. When I went to go do my homework, I can find the highlights to the Whitaker fight
Right.
against Chavez, but I can't see the whole fight. So
Yeah, I mean, so it's. I mean, we're temporarily blocked, but it's gonna. We should be back on the air, real soon.
So the next thing we're going to get to is the second McGirt fight, then, right?
Yeah. Well, I think we should skip it because we've already been here for 2 hours.
Okay, so we'll skip that one. Let's just go straight to De La Hoya because he really didn't do anything between outside of McGirt. He fought a lot of nondescript guys, and then he fought De La Hoya. The controversy there, and then Trinidad, and then we'll talk about his cocaine, and that's his career.
Right. Yeah. Well, then we'll talk about his cocaine. I like that's the chapter, the cocaine chapter.
That's what but you were talking about that when that I think it was not the Jacobs fight, that Russian Pestriov. He beat Pestriov, but then he tested positive for coke, and so that's why he didn't get the Corte fight. And then he was suspended, came back, fought Trinidad, and lost, and that was the end of his career. Well, he had one fight on ESPN in Quinstol because he said he dislocated his shoulder.
Well, yeah, come on. All right, well, we're back, and let's skip ahead a little bit here then, like we said. Okay, so, by the way, real quick about the Chavez Whitaker fight. And I told you guys, see, it was the darn Whitaker-Chavez fight. It's not on YouTube in its entirety. You can catch the highlights, I think, but in terms of the actual fight, for some reason, the Chavez-Whitaker fight and the Chavez-Camacho fight, you cannot find them on YouTube. For some reason, they get copyright strike. I think maybe they sold them on video. Maybe somebody has the video rights too. I don't know why, but it's weird that those two fights, big no. So hopefully that doesn't get. I mean, if we need to, I guess I can remove those parts from the stream. But I don't think we're gonna. I don't know if that's going to be necessary. A couple of more things about the Chavez fight the Chavez Whitaker fight that we didn't touch on in the Chavez episode. So the American media really made a big deal that it was one of the worst robberies ever. But again, they failed to mention that it was actually a close fight. And like you said, they certainly overlooked Whitaker's fouls in that one. Second of all, I asked you in the Chavez episode, how come there was no discussion of a rematch or nothing? I made a little research. I went on the message boards, talked to a couple of people. Apparently, nobody knows. Some people say, it's because Chavez didn't want it. He was afraid of being washed. Some people say that he realized he couldn't really compete at 147, decided to go back to 140, defend his titles there. Other people say that he was also adamant about becoming 100-0 or reaching that landmark. And so he said, screw a welterweight. It ain't going to happen if I stay a welterweight or even a super welterweight where there were discussions of a Terry Norris fight. So he decided to go back down. Also, I found out something interesting, Chief. First of all, we're not the first ones to notice. We're not the only ones to notice that this was a closer fight than people make it out to be. Some people out there did point out to the low blows, which is why some people said that the reason why Chavez didn't want a rematch is because he wanted to have kids, and those low blows weren't just going to allow him to do that. The other thing that I found interesting was some people were saying that Duvas were no saints. Somebody said in a Boxing 24 message board that the Duvas were just as bad as Don King. And I'm curious, do you know what that person meant by that?
Bobby Chess talks about this in a documentary that's on somewhere. I don't remember. Might be on Prime. I'm not sure where it is. But when I was on my smart TV, they were talking about the Duvas, and then Bobby Chess makes the comment. He says, you can be as good as friends as you want to with them, but at the end of the day, that company's family, and you're not part of their family. And I'll leave that at that. On what that meant. I just know that, no, they were no saints. I mean, well, first of all, look at everything I pointed out already. Every time they tried to make Whitaker a landmark, they went after somebody else other than the marketable powerhouse that ended up in the Hall of Fame. They didn't go after Chavez. They didn't go after Camacho. They didn't go after Rosario. All three of those guys in the Hall of Fame. And every time they made a landmark where those guys were in the same division, they didn't go after those guys. They went after somebody else first. This is factual. So everyone that wants to say that I'm a hater and everything else, this is all three of those guys in the Hall of Fame. Whitaker did not fight those guys first. Ever. So as far as the crookedness, someone even said somewhere that they read in Duva's biography or something, which I have not read, and so don't quote me on this part, but I've heard through someone who said they read it, that they said themselves they tried to age Chavez out.
Well, can I give you some comments here from the Boxing Forum 24? Again, I'm not a big fan of Boxing 24 because it's mostly a blog site, but when it comes to the forum, it is fantastic. This is what one guy had to say about that fight, about the Chavez-Whitaker fight. He said, I don't think the Duvas were the good guys, as TKO magazine seems to suggest every other sentence. They were no better or honorable than Don King. The Duvas were the reason we didn't see the fight much sooner. The bout being at 147 had thrown some question on it, and rightfully so. Duva tried to do that with Meldrick Taylor, but Chavez had already damaged him enough that it didn't matter. So there is that seems to be the narrative. Again, I don't know if it's correct or not, but it seems to reflect what you're saying, which is that the Duvas were sort of playing games in the lead up to the Chavez fight. Let me read another comment. Somebody says, Chavez was obviously God around the first matchup. Why would he take the fight at 147? Never understood that. Sweet Pea needed him more than Chavez needed him. I know that the Duvas and Sweet Pea avoided Chavez for about 4 years. I thought Pea clearly won the fight, but it was boring, dirty, and pointless at 147. The fight was not a blowout or a schooling, as many just say, because it's a cool thing to say. It was a close fight, and Chavez had many moments in it. Whitaker also made Chavez a eunuch. So I really am curious about that whole thing about the Duvas avoiding the fight for 4 years.
So let's quickly touch on this one because you said you definitely wanted to move to De La Hoya. But let's go with what Duvas themselves, because that's two fighters now. That's Taylor and Whitaker and Chavez.
Mm-hmm.
So remember the night of that triple header when he fought Nazario, that's when he first started mentioning Chavez as an opponent. That was 89 or 90. That fight didn't happen until 93. And if I could have happened all the way back in, like, I think he said 87 or 88 when Chavez had a title and then went after Ramirez instead. So the proof is in the pudding. This is, and now you're having other fans through other sites notice the same thing. So we're starting to notice a pattern that I'm not just making this up because I don't like Pernell Whitaker. These things happen this way. Now, as far as I know, it's about Whitaker, but the Mildred Taylor moves up in weight and looks great against Aaron Davis, but then looks bad against Glenwood Brown and Garcia. And I think by this time they realized a rematch with Chavez is not going to bode well for him. So we'll let him try something else like Terry Norris, because he's still got it prime enough left. He should be competitive. And if he's not, then he's damaged goods and we'll part ways. But so they had a two-headed monster to try with. And Taylor was obviously not living outside of the Davis fight, wasn't living up to it. Mm-hmm. So they used the Chavez aspect. Now, why Chavez went to 147 because he wanted to be a 4-division champion. He would have been the only Mexican to be a 4-division champion until Canelo if he would have won that. So did he need to go there? No, he did not. But he wanted Whitaker, and he wanted a 4th title, and he wanted 100-0, and he wanted to be $100 million, and he wanted Selma Hayek, and he wanted a lot of things. So he went after it. I mean, he was a great fighter. Great fighters challenge themselves for another landmark. So I'm going to fight Whitaker at 147, get my 4th title, and get to 100-0. I mean, he challenged himself. He just came up short. It didn't work.
Well, I mean, that's what it is. That fight, again, still gets talked about. Sometimes I do wonder if people have actually seen the fight or just go by what they hear on Twitter and other social media platforms. They, oh, yeah, Whitaker got robbed. He whitewashed. He schooled Chavez. I mean, I don't know. I think people need to watch the whole fight. But again, speaking of greatness, Whitaker continued on with a great career. He ended up rematching McGirt in October 1994. Again, McGirt, as Chief alluded to in the first fight, still has an injury on his left shoulder. Nevertheless, managed to give Whitaker hell, drops him. This is another fight on HBO. Whitaker did return to HBO afterwards for this fight. Another tough fight, but he was able to outwork McGirt, retain his welterweight championship. Then, speaking of greatness, Whitaker decides to win a title in a 4th-weight division in 1995. Takes on Julio Cesar Vasquez from Argentina. Just to put it in perspective, Vasquez, if you watch him compared to Whitaker, strong upper body, strong big shoulders, 52 wins, 1 loss, 35 knockouts. He was making his 12th defense of the title. And at the time, he held wins over a young Javier Castillejo, Aaron Davis, Tony Marshall, and a young Winky Wright. Ended up dropping him a bunch of times in that fight over in France, I believe. Oh, hold on a second. Are we having difficult? Okay, I thought we were having connection issues. So that was the Vasquez, and Vasquez gave Whitaker hell in that fight. Ended up dropping him. At some points, Whitaker was trying to clown. Vasquez wasn't having it, and I think that's the fight, Chief, that let Whitaker know. Okay, I think 154. That's the limit. I'm not going to be able to do as well as I did in other divisions if I stay here.
So, real quick. Again, I'm going to sound like the wet blanket. He was just coming off Vasquez as the winner of a Winky Wright. So I imagine they think, okay, if I can beat this guy, I can beat a small former lightweight. So they go into this fight. I'm not saying he took him lightly or anything. I don't think he had the skill to beat Pernell Whitaker no matter what. He had the power, but not the skill. But this fight, Whitaker had already said after one of his fights at welterweight, I'm a welterweight. I'm not a junior middleweight. This is my limit. Terry Norris loses by disqualification to, I forget the guy's name.
Santana.
Luis Santana. And so now Terry Norris is no longer at top of the pound-for-pound list. He'd already lost to Simon Brown, won his title back. Now he lost by disqualification, and he's not champion. Then Whitaker goes up to 154. I mean, the pattern's there, people. It doesn't matter whether you think I like him or not. The pattern's there. Then they went up when there wasn't a Terry Norris. Terry Norris wins his belt back, they vacate and go back down. You're right, he did drop Pernell. When he hit him clean, he knocked him off balance and stunned him. But the only 2 rounds I really remember him doing well was, I think it was the 4th he got the knockdown, and in the 12th he came out trying to knock Whitaker out. Aside from that, it didn't look like he could dial him in. He didn't use a hook at all, Vasquez that is, and he just came up short and he didn't work the body at all. And so Whitaker was able to move around the ring, use his movement, use his IQ, and do pretty much what he wanted to do. And just too much skill. Too much ring IQ, I'll put it that way. I think they were both skilled fighters. Whitaker just had a higher IQ and knew how to use it. He knew how to judge range, and Vasquez didn't know how to judge it as well. And yeah, then there's the clowning like he was doing there. That's what dropped him, is he was doing his little ducking thing and got caught with a shot he didn't see. And I remember Georgie Benton wasn't very happy with him when that happened.
Was this, I mean, this is mid-90s here. Was this when Whitaker, because I mean, we talked about Chavez leading a less than stellar lifestyle outside the ring. Was this when Whitaker started dabbling with the narcotics too, or was this just him fighting above his best weight class?
So when he got caught with that, which is going to come up at the end of the show, that's when the Duvas started saying, yeah, Whitaker was always a partier. At this point in time, again, very little, if any, internet, no cell phones. There wasn't a rumor in Augusta, Georgia, which is where I lived at the time, that he was a big partier and was doing narcotics and drinking too much. The Duvas said he liked to later, and said he always had. In other words, not giving a year that it really started. So I'm not saying no to that, but there's nothing confirming the fact that it was already happening.
Mm-hmm.
So, but in hindsight, he did have a lot of fun with alcohol. When I saw him at the Hall of Fame, when he was at the bar he was drinking, he was the life of the party. During the day when he wasn't drinking, and not to disparage him, I'll call it fair, Alexis Arguello was the same way. At night when everyone was, partying it up, they were the life of the party. But during the day when they haven't had their morning Bloody Mary, they were both a little on the grumpy side.
Right.
So, and I mean, look, fighters have a hole in their body, in their soul that is filled with fighting, and then when it's over, they replace it with other stuff. Whitaker's no stranger to it than anybody else. Chavez did it too. Back to whether I confirm that he was already a party at this time, I cannot. But the quote unquote always had been alludes to the fact that he probably could get away with it when he was younger, and by this time was probably starting to catch up with him a little more. Because if you look at his quality of competition in between Chavez and De La Hoya, with the exception of Vasquez, it's not that great. Gary Jacobs, Jake Rodriguez, I forget the guy from Colombia he fought in his first defense after Chavez. Buddy McGirt was not his best anymore, so it wasn't like they were going after the big challenges. Mind you, he and Felix Trinidad won their titles at welterweight the same year. Pernell was in March. Trinidad's was in June against Maurice Blocker. So putting that out there, that they were outside of the Chavez fight, it wasn't like they were looking for the next rock to smooth out, I guess,
right.
To put it, since,
Yeah, no, yeah, you're right. And by this time, they were talking about, well, who can Whitaker fight? But I'm thinking, well, there's a guy by the name of Felix Trinidad right there. But the point is that at this point, Don King still has his stable over at Showtime, and HBO, which is the #1 boxing network, had Whitaker. So they sort of compromised for the Chavez fight, but I don't think they were going to, especially with the Duvas involved, they weren't exactly going to compromise to fight a dangerous guy like Trinidad. I will give credit for Whitaker. I took Whitaker for fighting Vasquez. I mean, you saw that the size difference there. Vasquez looked like a caveman. And again, I always felt watching that fight, every time I watch that fight, I feel like Whitaker's walking a tightrope. Like sometimes he gets hit with certain shots and he'll clinch, and other times he'll make Vasquez miss by a little bit, but you can tell that the fucking punches are heavy. And I'm surprised he didn't get knocked out in that fight, because I mean, he did get dropped and he did get stunned a couple of times, but like you said, he ended up as he showed earlier in other fights, showed some grit and managed to outbox a bigger guy and won his fourth title, or actually his another title in the 4th weight division.
Yes.
So like you said, he ends up at this point, however, much like Chavez. It's interesting that both Chavez and Whitaker, after their fights, just never were the same. Although Whitaker had a slightly better career. I mean, he did beat McGirt afterwards. Again, that fourth division title against Vasquez. He takes on, we're going to skip ahead here, the Rivera fights from 1996. Wilfredo Rivera, like Buddy McGirt and, what's his name? Buddy McGirt and Roger Mayweather, long fighter with a good right hand. He gives Whitaker hell in the first fight. A lot of people feel that Rivera should have won the first fight. As you can see, sometimes certain decisions went against Whitaker. Sometimes he benefited from dubious decisions. Then he fights Rivera in a rematch. Actually does better, although it's still a very competitive fight. Now, Chief, 1996, we go to January 1997, and by this time, a guy by the name of Oscar De La Hoya, fellow gold medalist, the Golden Goose, the face of boxing, is about to move up to welterweight. He's third weight class. No, excuse me, fourth weight class, right? Yeah, super featherweight, lightweight. Yeah, fourth weight class. And they're locking eyes for a potential welterweight fight. But first, Whitaker has to get past the Osbelis Hurtado. What was the what were the machinations behind this fight and for an upcoming De La Hoya fight?
Okay, so to validate what you said, hopefully as fast as you did, the Rivera fights, the politics in hindsight was pretty obvious. They wanted, if they couldn't get a Trinidad fight or a Terry Norris fight or a rematch with Chavez and De La Hoya wasn't there yet, they were going to try it to line up with Corte. And because Corte was on the undercard of the first Rivera fight. But after the Rivera performance, they're like, yeah, we're not taking that fight on. Because if you remember, Corte knocked out Vince Phillips in 3 easy rounds. And so they're like, yeah, no, we're not going that route. So they went the rematch with Rivera. And like I said, some of the other softer competition along the way. They get to Hurtado. Ring Magazine at the time had the WBC rankings of Hurtado being ranked number 12 by the WBC at junior welterweight when he was announced as the mandatory contender for Pernell Whitaker in that fight. Again, boxing is what boxing is. This isn't just for Pernell Whitaker. It happens throughout boxing history. So for some reason, this fight gets in there. I don't know what or why or how, other than the fact I think the Duvas already had their hands on Hurtado. And I guess this was kind of like their testing fight to see what they were going to do with him down the road. Because every fight after, I don't know about beforehand, but every fight after this, I saw Luduva in the corner to Hurtado in every fight. So leading up to this fight, and we're going to hit on it as much as you want to, because like I know we're trying to get to other fights. This one was a surprise. They did not expect Hurtado to be this difficult for them to fight. And as I said on Thunderdome Show, fighters like Pernell and Floyd and James Toney and guys like that, Roy Jones, when the counter punchers that like for you to come to them, when you make them be the aggressor, their IQ is not the same. They're incredibly talented, high IQ fighters in their style. Once you take them out of that comfort zone, it's not the same. They're not as good. They're not as proficient. They make more mistakes. Whitaker's now older. He's not partying as hard. I mean, not training as hard. De La Hoya even is ringside for this because he had just had his fight with Miguel Angel Gonzalez. And everyone knew that that De La Hoya was going to be the next fight. And De La Hoya had made the comments, I really don't know if Whitaker trained very hard for this fight because I remember at the weigh-in, these are Oscar's words, he stepped on the scale, had hit 147 and stepped off immediately. So I don't know if he trained as hard as he should have for this fight. And he did look a little pudgier around the middle for this fight.
Mm-hmm.
So had he trained as hard as he should have, would it have been any different? I couldn't tell you.
Right.
What I do know is that he didn't know who he was getting in with until he got in the ring, and he had to dig himself out of a hole. And how he got the knockout when he wasn't known for knocking people out, I don't know. But if he wouldn't have had it, he should have been behind on the scorecards.
Well, I mean, the like we were saying, I mean, that's a constant theme when we do these fight reviews or fighter reviews is the best, the all-time greats pull it out when they need to. And
he did.
This was actually quite rare to see Cuban fighter, actual Cuban, 100%, not like a Cuban guy who was born in Miami or whatever. No, this is a Cuban guy. This wasn't common in the 1990s. And like you said, I don't think they knew who they were going up there against. I mean, yeah, Hurtado's resume paled in comparison to Whitaker's, but he was back foot bitching it here, as you can see, classic Cuban school from this time, moving, giving Whitaker a taste of his own medicine. And Whitaker just looked sluggish, like he couldn't cut the ring off. You can tell that he's sloppy. He has to make it dirty to try to get at Hurtado. And Chief, I remember this fight. I wasn't as savvy as I am now, or as I like to think I am, in regards to boxing. I remember thinking, this is the guy that's going to beat De La Hoya? It's like, I didn't see it. You know what I mean? It's like...
that was the thing going at it, because it looked like he was finally past his best on taking on not a second-rate fighter, but not a great welterweight. And remember, Hurtado went back down to junior welterweight after this to win a title and have some success. So he wasn't a real welterweight. Honestly think he was handpicked to test him against a long, lanky guy to prepare him for what they thought De La Hoya might have been. Obviously De La Hoya's a knockout guy, but he also had the ability to do some of these things like Hurtado. So this was the one to try and test the range to see what he could do, and it was very difficult for him. This is the knockout, and he went and got it. He went and dug. We talk about grit. This showed the grit. This showed the grit. He went after Hurtado. That's not his style. That's not what he's proficient at, and he got the job done. And but you're right. He looked sloppy. He just couldn't. He couldn't cut the ring off. But when had he ever done that before?
Exactly,
he had trouble finding. The thing about Hurtado had the timing. I don't think Whitaker's speed was off this night. Hurtado timed him every time. Anytime they got close, he used the same thing that what's his name, Lara likes to do, and throws that jab that he knows isn't going to score because it's too far away. But he knows where the end of that jab is, and he can judge the range of how close you are to that jab. So when he's throwing it and it's like still like a foot away from your face, he knows exactly how much further you are away from that fist. So he knows exactly how much closer you need to get to let his combinations go. Lara does the same thing all the time. He purposely throws that punch out to where it's not going to land, but he can see how far away you are from him when he does that. And that's his gauge to see how close you are. And the second you start to get close enough, that's when he throws his combinations, clinches, does what he needs to do for your attack, but he prepares for his attack by how close you are to the end of his fist. And that's what Hurtado was doing.
That's an interesting breakdown, and it makes me wonder, because again, at this point, okay, so Whitaker, he beat Chavez, but it was a difficult fight. Again, more competitive than people make it out to be. Then he struggles against Buddy McGirt. Then he struggles against Rivera twice. Now he's struggling against Hurtado, and I'm thinking, okay, is this a case of him getting older, fighting long-rangey guys that have starting to figure him out? Is it the lifestyle outside the ring? Is it a combination of all three? I don't know. But it's clear that he's struggling more than he ever has. And this is the type of, those were the type of guys that make me wonder, well, how would Whitaker have done against a Tommy Hearns? Forget about it. Or at least let's put him in there against a guy that he has a chance with. Let's say a Vernon Forrest. Prime Vernon, the Vernon Forrest that beat Sugar Shane Mosley. How would Whitaker have done against a tall, rangy guy like that?
I'm not going to make that prediction. What I am going to say is everybody knows that I know a lot about Vernon because I grew up with him. Not best friends, not the closest guys in the world, but went to high school together and came from the same gym. So I know Vernon very well. Here's what I know. Vernon's career was stunted because the Doofus signed him. This part I don't have complete proof of, but I do know they used him as chief sparring partner for Whitaker because you had all these tall, lanky welterweights. That was the rumor on why he didn't get a title shot sooner, because they didn't get him fights to get him ranked very high, but they kept him as a chief sparring partner for Whitaker over and over and over again. So by the time they would have fought, if you remove him as the chief sparring partner throughout his career, and what would Vernon have become without that, and then match them together, I don't know. But if you would have taken the Vernon that had been sparring with him the whole time, getting him ready for these fights, and then put him in the ring against Whitaker, well, he knows everything he's going to do. He spars with him all the time. He knows every weakness. He knows everything about the guy. So I'm not saying Vernon wins easily. I'm not saying Vernon knocks him out or beats him or anything. But it's going to make Whitaker look extremely bad because he's going to be with a tall, lanky fighter that knows him from fat camp to getting in shape for sparring, for everything of what Whitaker has to offer. So how would he have done specifically against Vernon? He would have definitely struggled. Now, my opinion, if you put him in with Daryl Coley and Obakar, two other welterweights of the 90s that were solid contenders, he would struggle with them. He would struggle with them because Coley's not going to take a front step. His lateral movement uses speed. You're going to walk in his counter shots, and it would have to be like the Hurtado fight to win. It's not to say he couldn't have pulled it off because Coley didn't have a great chin, but that's what he's going to have to go through to get that win. And Obakar would have been able to take it tooth and nail with him because he had that high of a boxing IQ.
Interesting. Yeah. Now,
and those are contenders. Those aren't great. Those aren't all-time greats. Those are just the contenders.
Right.
So,
again, I don't know what was going on with Whitaker here. I suspect it might have been a combination of all those things that I mentioned, that maybe that's why he wasn't looking as stellar as he used to before. By the way, the phone lines are open. I think somebody in the chat said that they wanted the phone lines to be open. So we're going to keep them open for a little bit, and while we talk about some of these fights, because we still have a lot to get to. In fact, we still have to get to the De La Hoya fight. So Whitaker saves...
The other non-robbery.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I mean, Whitaker ends up saving the mega fight. De La Hoya at this point, I forget what his record was, but he was in his early 20s. He'd won a paper title at super featherweight. I don't count the WBO, never will. But he won the WBO super featherweight title. He won the IBF, I believe, at lightweight.
He won both WBO and IBF.
Oh, okay, there you go. Then the IBF the WBC at junior welterweight. So he, on his way to welterweight, he ended up beating a plethora of good lightweights like John Molina, JC James Leija, Chicanito Hernandez, Rafael Ruelas. And then obviously at junior welterweight, Chavez and Miguel Angel Gonzalez, who had a pretty glossy record, Hernandez did. But there was an asterisk next to all those wins because the lightweights that he beat were all smaller guys, even though they were good lightweights, but they were all smaller than De La Hoya. Chavez was smaller and older. Miguel Angel Gonzalez, despite his glossy record, really wasn't all that. And so we're getting into the Whitaker fight, and I remember a lot of people saying, all right, now we're going to find out what De La Hoya is made of. He's the golden goose at this point. He's got all these endorsements, big HBO pay-per-views. The women love him. He's got a gold medal around his neck. Undefeated record, multiple titles across multiple weight divisions. Like I said, golden goose. It just seems like he cannot be stopped. But Pernell Whitaker has more experience than an already experienced De La Hoya here. He is a puzzle to solve with his fantastic defense. But then again, he's up against it because he's fighting a guy who's got incredible speed in De La Hoya. On top of that, he's got power. He's got a power laser jab, dynamite left hook. He's got a gold, like I said, he's a gold medalist, so we know he can box. And we saw that Whitaker was sort of slowing down now. Chief, it seems like Whitaker's up against it in this fight.
Oh, this was going to be how many rounds can Whitaker do? Especially after Hurtado fight. That was the theme going in. We've seen Whitaker shook before by big punchers, so how many rounds is it going to go? It was the question. Was it going to be competitive? Mm-hmm. Whitaker decided. I think Duva and Benton got there. Ronnie Shields might have been doing more of the training by this time. Benton might have been out of the picture, but either way, his two cornermen got a hold of him and said, "You're not going to beat De La Hoya fighting like that. If you're not going to focus, then you're going to get knocked out." And he took that to heart. He trained hard. He came in trim, and I've never seen him he did a lot of like little tricks to look slippery against Chavez. He wasn't that slippery, not as slippery as he was against De La Hoya. Mm-hmm. I don't think I've ever seen anybody slip shots the way he did. As Steve Kim says, nobody talks about, wow, did you see that defense last night? Unless you talk about Pernell Whitaker highlights. And the highlight they're talking about is this particular fight. Right.
Do you need to switch to a PC or something right now? Or because you just told me you're...
I don't have the stuff for a PC, so I'm going to head upstairs real quick and get to my charger.
All right. I can take over in the meantime. Now we're getting to the point where I was getting way more invested in boxing, so I can keep up with Chief here a little bit. So like he was saying, Whitaker was up against it. Here you see De La Hoya looking like Matt Dillon in the house that Jack built with the red. By the way, De La Hoya at this point is being trained by El Maestro, or El Maestrito. What was his last name? First name, rather. Rivera, who was associated with the great Miguel Canto back in the 70s. Miguel Canto, of course, you'll remember, is one of the greatest Mexican fighters of all time and one of the greatest defensive fighter of all time and also one of the greatest bantamweights of all time. So just a bunch of accolades. And so De La Hoya at this point was a bit of a chameleon, but on what's the word I'm looking for here? He had a lack of confidence. He was unsure of himself. He didn't know if he wanted to be a puncher. He didn't know if he wanted to be a boxer. And so he was switching up between trainers. I think after this, he would go on with Emmanuel Stewart and then with, what was the other guy's name? It was a guy with a mustache. Forget his name. But anyway, this was his stint with Oliveira. The previous fight that they'd had was in the Miguel Angel Gonzalez fight. And De La Hoya was showing improved head movement. He showed improved head movement against Gonzalez, and he would need all of his guile and skill against Pernell Whitaker, who powered up for this fight. And, I'm looking at the comments for this fight on YouTube, and a lot of people go, oh, it was a great fight. As much as a boxing fan as I am, I thought it was a little bit too sloppy for my taste. I think, Chief, let me know when you're back, by the way, if you're listening.
I'm back.
Oh, okay. So yeah, what did you think of the aesthetic aspects of this fight?
You were right. It was a bit on the sloppy side but it was sloppy not because Whitaker made it sloppy, it's because De La Hoya couldn't deal with Whitaker's skill.
Mm-hmm.
And so he got sloppy because he was dialing in for the knockout. He wasn't using his jab or trying to set things up and fighting smart. Like I told you, my late friend Clay would say, you're not going to beat Pernell that way. So you got to touch him, use angles, turn him. You got to use his skills against him and set things up with shots he doesn't see by making him uncomfortable. De La Hoya didn't do that. He played right into his hands. He went right at him with big shots, particularly the left, which Whitaker was excellent at neutralizing. So, like Chavez, like Valdez against Shakur, the right hand now becomes the jab and the money punch, and everything else is he tries with it, but it becomes neutralized. So De La Hoya kind of he still has his jab, which he used a lot in this fight, which me personally, I think this is why he won. Is because he did establish the jab, and even if it wasn't landing clean and he wasn't knocking him off balance and everything else, when they weren't posing and looking for openings, he was dictating the pace of the fight with the jab. So here's this combination where he's throwing some stuff to the kidneys, but De La Hoya is the one consistently trying to make the fight. So the ring generalship was controlled by him, which is why I think he won. But Whitaker did absolutely everything possible to make him look bad. And so in the end, the way I look at this fight was Whitaker here he is kneeing him in the head. Tell you what, it's the people that try and say that he's this classy guy because the highlights they watched of him instead of what he really was. I mean,
right.
De La Hoya trips over his foot, goes into the ropes. Instead of backing out, Whitaker tries to walk over him and kneeing him in the face the whole time. I mean, come on. That's not a class act.
Yeah, I agree. He was a guy win by all means necessary. Back to
the point. The point, because this isn't a trash Whitaker show; it's a Whitaker career show.
Well, it doesn't seem like that way, Chief. I mean,
look, I am who I am.
I'm kidding. Okay.
No, but back to the point of giving Whitaker's props. Look at every last punch that he just made De La Hoya miss by like a fraction of a centimeter. If you can rewind that one for a second.
Well, I put in slow motion here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he actually gets clipped by a little bit of a shot, right? There. And then the follow-up is, look, I've never seen a person slip like that before.
It's amazing.
I mean, I've seen a lot of slippery fighters. I've never seen someone slip quite like that. And De La Hoya has to reach a lot. And so when he reaches in with that right hand, Whitaker counters with his right jab, he doesn't really have a hook by this time in his career anymore. So it's usually just the jab. And remember the body punching we're talking about, it's pretty much just the straight left of the belt line now, not low blow, but like the way Floyd used to throw his jab to the body to establish range and score points. It wasn't doing any damage. It wasn't to do damage. It was to win the ring generalship. I'm going to dictate the pace. I'm going to set the distance with this punch. And so Whitaker would throw the jab upstairs and throw either the straight left to the chin or the body. And that's what he would establish his range with. But that's what he'd become to. He didn't have a hook. He didn't throw really good combinations anymore. It was really just his right and then the straight left. And the straight left was usually one of two places. Because of that, when you're fighting a young guy like De La Hoya who has a high IQ, you need more of your arsenal than that. And so Whitaker's arsenal became defense. and it became a very slick defense. And that's what he did in the fight. And he frustrated De La Hoya all night long. Don't get me wrong. But again, it was enough to make him look bad, not enough to win. And so this is another situation where if you say it loud enough, people start to believe you. Whitaker started crying robbery the very get-go. And then people started following suit with us. Like, where this was one where it wasn't like, okay, you should have won, but it wasn't that bad. This is one I'm like, where was the robbery? Name me 7 rounds that you won. Name me 6 to get a draw.
Well, can I say something about that real quick? That's something that you just reminded me of. One of the reasons why I'm adamant about saying that the Chavez fight was a robbery, but we got to put the disclaimer that it was not a whitewash they make it out to be. And it's important because at some point, if you just keep labeling everything a robbery, obviously it's going to lose its meaning. And that's one of the things that ended up happening here because of the fact that a lot of people ended up putting Whitaker on that pedestal of, oh, poor him, he's the victim. After every close fight, it was like, oh, well, you know, it's got to go to Whitaker because sort of to make up for what happened against Chavez. And this, like you're seeing here, it's a very competitive fight. And De La Hoya, one step ahead.
I was good with too young to. All right, if this would have been like a 29-year-old Whitaker that fought Chavez, I have no idea who would have won. De La Hoya fighting like this, but if you're trying to state the what ifs, okay, what if De La Hoya would have fought Whitaker the way he fought Trinidad and moved around the ring and made Whitaker cut the ring off, which we showed against Hurtado he couldn't do. So we judge this fight for how it is, not what if and what they could have done at different times.
Right.
What it was is a young guy who was faster, more powerful, and had more stamina than at this point in time, versus a guy who was using ring experience and slickness, but he wasn't busy enough. And I mean, even Larry Merchant, who loved Pernell Whitaker, and for those of them who like to say, "Oh, he was racist and biased," he loved Pernell Whitaker, but he said, "Look, I had him winning it close." So if he didn't like Whitaker, he would have been with Jim Lampley going, "Yeah, he didn't win this fight." He thought that he won. Duvid later said when he talked to him in an interview sometime later, said, "Look, Whitaker, I thought you won it close, but you let it go by not doing more." Well, I mean, that tells you right there that your trainer may have told you something a little different, like, yeah, you actually lost this fight because you didn't do more. What he said to the public may have been something different, but the bottom line was everyone who knows boxing knows that it was close because Whitaker didn't do enough.
Right. And, you know, what's interesting is Whitaker did pretty well in this fight. Like you said, he's up against a taller, bigger welterweight. I mean, fighter, even though De La Hoya is the one who's coming up in weight. He was actually, at this point, he was a junior welterweight, really. Junior middleweight. He was a junior middleweight, longer reach, arguably faster hands, definitely a bigger puncher, iron chin, and yet Whitaker, by virtue of his defense and his skills, and of course the dark arts, as we mentioned, managed to frustrate him quite well. But again, De La Hoya, never known for his right hand, right there, scored a right hand. You never saw De La Hoya this good again with that right hand, even in the Trinidad fight, which is probably the best De La Hoya ever. He was landing straight right hands on Whitaker, and he was landing, hard to land a left hook against a southpaw, especially one as elusive as Whitaker. De La Hoya was doing that. He was hitting him with some mean uppercuts. Again, credit to Whitaker for staying in there against a big puncher with fast hands, but I don't think he won this fight.
No, just look at this sequence right here. De La Hoya is keeping him at bay, and Whitaker's walking into stuff. And this might be where that controversial knockdown. I call it controversial for a reason. The above angle in between rounds shows the fact that De La Hoya tripped over Whitaker's foot when he was trying to regain his balance. And that's what caused him to put his glove down on the canvas, which, look, I never became a professional referee, but everything I've known is that when your foots get tangled, that's supposed to negate a knockdown. First of all, look at the punch that first lands. It was an accidental forearm to the face. Boom, that's a forearm.
Yeah.
Okay, he wasn't throwing a forearm to be dirty. That's just the way the punch landed.
Well, you never know with Whitaker, though. But see, that's the point. When you're dirty, you don't get the benefit of the doubt anymore. I don't know if it was intentional or not.
I've been dogging him all night, and I'm going to say that didn't look intentional.
Right.
So I'm going to call it like I see it. It was a wide shot. De La Hoya was moving. It didn't land. He got clubbed with the forearm instead. It's just the way they remember southpaw and orthodox. And De La Hoya was switching stances when it happened. So no, I don't believe that was intentional. So I just think it's the way it happened. But when and then Whitaker threw a secondary left in close that clipped the chin. De La Hoya lost balance. When he went to regain his balance, the above view in between rounds shows the fact that his foot goes back and hits Whitaker's foot, and that's when he uses the glove to catch himself. So it's after their feet get tangled that he puts the glove down.
Mm-hmm.
If it was just from those two shots and the glove went down, you can't argue that. But once their feet got tangled and the above shot in between rounds shows clearly the fact that De La Hoya's foot gets tangled with Whitaker's, that's what caused the quote-unquote knockdown. But if you add in that lovely WBC rule where the uncut fighter, in a clash of heads, the uncut fighter gets the point deduction. That was a round I thought Whitaker clearly lost. So there's 2 10-8 rounds apiece, so they wipe themselves out.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, like you said, yeah, those things sort of disqualify themselves. Late in this fight now, De La Hoya in the championship rounds, when it really matters, ended up doing what he should have from the get-go, making the shorter guy go to him. And this is where De La Hoya, I think, by winning those last 2 rounds, really solidified his lead in the fight. And see that he's bouncing up and down? That's an old school trick. When a guy keeps clinching you, you jump up and down so that your shoulders actually start smashing into him.
Which is what Whitaker was doing to Chavez. And so, like I said, when you're roughing a guy up and that's your game plan, I'm not calling those type of fouls. That's part of the game. Below the belt, look, a man's manhood is a man's manhood. There's only certain people supposed to be touching that. So, and in a boxing ring, it's nobody's. So, but yeah, was that a dirty trick that De La Hoya was doing? Absolutely was. Whitaker did the same thing to Chavez. So I'm not going to call it a foul. It was a smart move. It was a trick of the trade. But again, when Whitaker did it to Chavez, Whitaker thought it was, fair game. When De La Hoya did it to him, he looked at the referee like, you're going to let him get away with this?
Exactly.
Anyway, okay, I'm sorry. And moving on, though, I never saw the robbery here. But Whitaker's best defensive work, and if you're going to show a kid how to be a slick fighter, this is the fight you want to show him. Even though it's a losing effort for him, this is the fight you want to show. Because I've watched highlights of Willie Pep, Miguel Canto, who's the Argentinian guy? Nicolini.
Loche.
Yeah, Loche. Another really, personally, I think that Benton might have watched some of Loche and taught Pernell those moves. But the last time I saw someone look that much like Loche, it was Whitaker in this fight. The way he made him, I'm just sorry. That defense was amazing. It just wasn't enough to win the fight. Yeah,
you don't win points with defense. I mean, you gotta be aggressive. That's what the judges like. And it was a interesting, good effort from Whitaker. But this time, however, his defense, neither his defense nor his dirty tricks could sway the judges. And I mean, again, this was the Golden Boy, flashy hands. I think that also played a part in the judges noticing his punches more than they noticed Whitaker's. A couple of key points here about this fight. Like Chief said, Larry Merchant was really, what's the word I'm looking for here? Championing for Whitaker. So when people look back and they go, "Oh, Merchant was a racist," nah, he just called it like it was. And sometimes when he called it like it was against Afro-Anglo fighters, certain Afro-Anglo fans can take it. And it happens with everybody. I mean, he said, I think it was in this fight, the De La Hoya Whitaker fight, where he said that the mariachi music was awful. And some Mexicans accused him of being racist. So you see, it goes all over the place. Lampley was the guy that was really dick riding De La Hoya, to the point where you could tell Roy Jones, who was doing the expert commentary, was getting annoyed. And he would start calling the shots that Whitaker landed right after Lampley would call a shot for De La Hoya. It's like, just to make sure, like, hey, listen, Whitaker's landing right back too. So it was a weird night of boxing. Again, this was supposed to be a big fight, a big event, pay-per-view. And like I said, I don't really enjoy watching this fight because it could have been much better, but due to De La Hoya's inexperience and to Whitaker's experience at being dirty, it turned out to be a bit of a sloppy fight. Like Chief said, I don't see the robbery here. And for years, Chief, I think I've told you this before, that there was a boxing site that I used to go to in the late 90s and the early 2000s. I don't even think it's on anymore. It used to be archived over at Cyber Boxing Zone, no longer.
I remember that zone.
But the website itself was called Boxing Chronicles. And back in those days, when you couldn't catch a fight, at least you could get a in-depth breakdown of what happened via Boxing Chronicles. But the guy who wrote it, I forget his name, was really biased against De La Hoya. I mean, in this fight, he claimed Whitaker schooled him. And again, it's like you said, perfectly encapsulated it. You tell a lie long enough, people start believing it. And
Yeah.
luckily, though, if you go to certain message boards now, people share our sentiment that no, it wasn't the robbery that people make it out to be. Would you say that a reason, again, one of the reasons why people cried robbery was because Whitaker at this point, post Chavez, was sort of a sympathetic character, and De La Hoya was the hated A side, you know, the guy with the gold medal, the good looks, the big powerhouse promotional outfit behind him. Do you think that has something to do with it?
I can't answer to that per se as much as the fact that I think people got used to. This was the beginning to me of people like really writing hard with who they liked, and so Whitaker crying robbery right away, people just went along with. Now, the journalists did not jump on board with this. There was a magazine after the Whitaker Chavez fight that had Whitaker, and then there's like a watermark of all the judges' scorecards, and not just the judges, but all the boxing writer scorecards of the fight, and everyone had Whitaker winning, right?
Mm-hmm.
To the cover of the Ring magazine. There was nothing like that for this fight. Whitaker wanted a rematch. Some people said we should have had one. De La Hoya didn't want it. And to be honest with you, I don't think the public really cared if we had another one. I mean, it wouldn't have sold as well, number one, because we'd already seen it once and it wasn't aesthetically pleasing to the eye. And number two, I think by this stage, what we've seen in hindsight, Whitaker would not have done better in the rematch.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's that. As far as like why were some people simping with it? Fans were being fans, but the boxing world wasn't jumping on board like they did with the Chavez fight, from the way I remember it.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, like I remember the people against De La Hoya at the time. People really set the bar high for him, because, like you said one time, it's when he was fighting Rafael Ruelas, people were like, "Oh, he's not gonna make it against this undefeated this power puncher. It ain't gonna happen." And then he took care of him in 2 rounds. So I think people kept raising the bar for De La Hoya, which I understand because he was the A side, he was the golden goose, and people always have high expectations or even a little bit of dislike, because, you know, hardcore boxing fans, they like the Tommy Hearns, Marvin Hagler type of guy, the guy that came up without a gold medal around his neck, without the big promotional outfit, you know, the guy that really goes out there for the kill. And De La Hoya, even though he had that killer instinct, I don't know, I think it's a combination of him being the pretty boy that women liked, that he had a lot of opportunities that some people might have come too soon, even though he proved that they didn't come too soon, that he took care of business. But also he was a big guy for the lightweight division. So again, people think, oh, here we go, he's a weight bully. So I think that's, and Whitaker had been around for longer, so he was sort of like a bit of a fan favorite against him. I think that all that culminated with that. I will say that Whitaker, not giving Whitaker a rematch, I think that because of the competitiveness of the fight, there should have been a rematch. And it always left me with a bad feeling where De La Hoya doesn't give him a rematch, but then the following year rematches Julio Chavez, whom he beat, without a shadow of a doubt in the first fight. I go, why you rematch that guy but not rematch Whitaker? I never understood that. Or fighting Camacho, Passy speed Camacho. So I would have liked
Camacho set himself up for that, though, by beating the comebacking Ray Leonard.
Right.
Behind the scenes, people were thinking if Ray Leonard could pull off a win like this, maybe we could do a match between him and Oscar in a mega fight, but it would obviously been more of a what's it called? An exhibition pay-per-view sanction situation, because there's no way Oscar was going to go out on purpose to try to give Ray Leonard an absolute, butt thrashing. I just don't think he would have done that. I think he's too classy for that. But if Leonard could have had a successful comeback, then, oh, wow, you know what? Let's get one more round. I think that they might have tried to make that fight. I do think that was the goal there. I honestly do. But he got knocked out.
Right.
And so,
I guess Camacho of all people.
Again, right. And so, but that got Camacho back in the limelight, who was on a winning streak, by the way, and had already beaten Tony McAfee. So, and now this is the Whitaker show, so we're not going to go too far down that rabbit hole. But Tony McAfee was a USA Tuesday Night ranked guy, and Camacho Camacho went in there and gave a good performance and beat him solidly. It wasn't his typical running, holding, and kind of, not that he didn't do any of that, but he actually went in there and threw the uppercut a lot and fought that kid back. He was a younger guy who was a contender, and that's what got those fights set that way. But again, so that's what happened there, and that's how Camacho got that fight with De La Hoya. The wins that he got plus the Ray Leonard fight, and so that's why that fight went that way. And let's face it, De La Hoya, just like Chavez before the Whitaker fight, had so many more opportunities. You had the Corte fight. You had Jose Luis Lopez was around. You had Trinidad. You had Obakar. You had Daryl Coley. You had other fighters that were younger and closer to their peak against this old guy that may have made you look bad, but you know, let's put it this way: if Whitaker would have won the fight, would they have given a rematch? The answer is no.
That's a good question. Yeah. He fought.
It's not a good question. The answer is no. They wouldn't have given it. If it would have been that, with the way that fight went, as close as it would have gone, if they would have gotten the nod, there would have been no rematch.
Huh, interesting.
They would have protected Whitaker they would have gone back to protecting Whitaker and looked for maybe Vince Phillips or guys like that, and they would have manufactured another mandatory contender like they did Hurtado. That's what they did with him. Right. That's just what his career was. It wasn't that he wasn't talented enough to do it. It's what they did with him. And so I can't stress this enough when everyone wants to call me a hater. It's not me being a hater. It's the fact that his handlers did this to him.
Well,
he didn't choose that himself.
In hindsight, De La Hoya just was all bad for Whitaker. Again, taller, longer, just as fast, if not faster, harder puncher, iron chin. So Whitaker wasn't going to be able to pull off a Hurtado against De La Hoya. So it was just a bad style matchup. And as we're going to see later on, in hindsight, Whitaker was about to enter a real downfall. Now it's going to be apparent that he really is degrading as a fighter. And so I don't see a De La Hoya fight going better for him. However, just for me, as a boxing fan, I would have liked to have seen a rematch at the time as opposed to De La Hoya fighting Camacho or Chavez. But again, it is what it is, and that's the way it went. Yeah. Now we get into 1997, I believe. When was this? Hold on, let me look it up. I'm starting to... We've been on for 3 hours. So I'm starting to get a little lost. But yeah, okay, so he fights an Uzbeki fighter, I think, hailing out of Russia, Pestraev, in October 1997. This is on HBO. Again, Whitaker is being set up for another big fight. They're trying to market it as, well, he's never actually been beaten. That's the selling point. He's never actually been decisively beaten. All his losses have asterisks on them and, the dubious draw against Chavez. So now they set him up against Andrei Pestraev, the rare Eastern European fighter on HBO. Chief, what happened there and what were some of the things going on behind the scenes as they try to set him up for another big payday?
Well, leading up to the fight, there's nothing behind the scenes. It's what happens afterwards. So there's not much to talk about the fight. Pestraev didn't know what to do against the southpaw. Whitaker was still too experienced. I don't care how close the scorecards were. It wasn't to the point where Whitaker was anywhere close to being upset. And he wins. But he wins like he's going through the motions. And I remember this is the first time Larry Merchant was really kind of on him like, all right, you've done this your whole career. Now show me something different. Do you have, because what you were doing obviously hasn't worked. Can you do something else? He said that somewhere, I'm paraphrasing in the commentary, and it just was unimpressive. No one was like, wow, he's definitely going to beat all the welterweights now. He's back. No one was writing this. No one was saying this. No one was claiming this. But this was supposed to set up a fight against Corte because it made Whitaker the number one contender, but he got popped for cocaine.
Oh.
Tested positive for cocaine after the fight, and then so he got suspended, and then he got popped with possession of cocaine when he got pulled over one time while on suspension, and maybe off on some of this stuff. But I'm pretty sure that I know he tested positive because this became a no contest. The other one where the vial of cocaine fell out from his wad of money may have been later, may have been after his next two fights, but I thought it was in between this and the Trinidad fight, which is of course the next fight. But that's really the only thing to talk about here. Yeah, he fights, he does, he wins, and I'm not gonna say that he didn't do well. It was nothing to write home about in any way, shape, or form. And plus, Pestraev was unknown. So it wasn't like he pulled off this upset against this monster. He was the better guy. He was expected to win. He did. He was expected to win decision. He did. He's expected to be hard to hit. He was. He expected to land more punches. He did. That was it. So, but the thing about it, in my point of view, was they didn't want to fight Felix Trinidad until they had to. So this fight was supposed to set up against Corte. And to be honest with you, he might have been able to pull off an upset against Corte because as good as Corte was, he was somewhat predictable. And if Whitaker would have been able to nullify the jab like he was able to nullify so many other people's left hand, Corte becomes just a straight right fighter. And you're going to need two hands to beat Pernell Whitaker. And I don't think Corte would have had enough of his right hand. The way I can picture it, if he nullifies Corte's jab, Whitaker keeps moving to his right. He wins the foot battle. Corte has to start winging the right hand from the outside because he's not going to be able to line him up for a straight right hand because his left won't be able to keep him in front of him. So the hook and the jab won't keep him in front of him. So he'll be reaching with the right hand all night long. Whitaker will duck underneath it, pepper some jabs, throw some lefts to the body, maybe a left hand to the head every once in a while, and we get a 12-round decision. So that is a possibility if Whitaker wins of how he would have won. Or Corte goes in and is too strong for him and roughs him up and pushes him around the ring like he did Obakar. And even Obakar was a right-handed fighter and Whitaker's not. Those are the only two extremes I can see. I can't see anything in between. So Corte either roughs him up and gets a victory that way, or Whitaker just nullifies the left hand and makes him a one-dimensional fighter and outboxes him. But at that stage of his career, I'm not positive Whitaker could have done that.
That's a fight that I was always intrigued by. Whitaker-Corte, what could have been. Because Corte, people forget about him because he had sort of a... By the time he fought De La Hoya, that's when people really started looking at him. And even though he fought on HBO beforehand, it almost... Because he was fighting in Europe beforehand, people really don't know that he actually had a bit of a long stint, but it seems short. But before I get to that, shout out to Rampax Trunking Company, 10-4. Shout out to Rampax Trunking Company for his contribution via the Buy Me a Coffee app. And he says, real quick, he says... Give me 2 seconds. I got to load these things up here. It's not always open. Hey, hopefully you guys are enjoying the show. Hit the like, hit the like, hit the like. Really helps us out. Rampax.
If I'm too long-winded, people, I apologize.
No, that's all right. That's all right. We're doing good. We're doing well. Shout out to Rampax who says people can say anything about Oscar De La Hoya. However, you can't accuse De La Hoya of being a woman beater like, come on, like the Morenitos. He says the Morenitos. All right. Shout out to Rampax. Appreciate his contribution. I gotta tell you, we should keep it, you guys should gotta, because there's a little bit of a racial war right now going on in the chat between people. We're sticking to boxing here, and that's the way we're gonna keep it. But shout out to Rampax for his contribution. Real quick, so I wanted to say about Corte. So yeah, Corte was a strong guy, very strong welterweight. You recall Vince Phillips doing very well at junior welterweight, and then fighting Corte and finding out that there's a big difference between junior welterweights and a strong welterweight, and I Corte just mauled him. So that was an interesting breakdown that you gave, Chief, of Whitaker. Corte, I would have been interested in seeing how a diminished Whitaker would have done against that. But you're right, Corte sort of slapped with the right hand, and it was only because he was strong that it seemed like a dangerous punch. But yeah, I don't know if it would have been accurate enough to deal with Whitaker. It would have been interesting. But unfortunately, Whitaker had his substance abuse issues, and that fight never materialized. And so Whitaker ended up having to sit out the rest of 1998, not doing anything.
Yep.
So how does the Trinidad fight come along?
Well, by this time, Don King leaves Showtime and brings his fighters over to HBO, and they are particularly hungry for Felix Trinidad because they signed him to a big contract. First of all, I can see in the chat, Gonzalo, the salute right back at you, my friend. But back to boxing. So this is a fight that I've been waiting for since 1993.
Oh.
I've been telling everybody Trinidad can beat him. Trinidad's going to beat him. Trinidad's going to beat him. Trinidad's the uncrowned champion. He's the monster. He's the boogeyman. Nobody wants to fight him. The evidence I have is true as the fact that De La Hoya wins in 1997. They don't fight until 1999. So De La Hoya is trying to challenge himself by taking on the toughest guy in the division. Really? Because I thought he fought Pernell Whitaker, not Felix Trinidad. That's what I was saying back then.
Really?
So he
Interesting.
tested himself against the biggest challenge by fighting the lightest puncher who was a former lightweight and not the monster that's knocking everybody out, who's undefeated, who's his age, his height, his reach, his knockout percentage. Whitaker's the biggest challenge he can get, not Trinidad. Okay, I got you. I wasn't buying into that for a second. I knew that Trinidad should have been the first person he fought, but but this is about Pernell Whitaker. So Whitaker finally has to fight Trinidad because Corte loses his belt. I don't remember where where Corte De La Hoya was in conjunction with this fight. It was somewhere close to it, but I don't remember which one happened first. But now there's no longer a network issue. There's no money in it because HBO is sponsoring it. There's no longer anything else to get in the way of the fact that this fight needed to happen. And so it comes together. And yes, it was an aging Whitaker. Yes, it was a Whitaker that wasn't quite at his best and not training as hard as he used to. But Trinidad was so smart with this fight because all he did was jab and sidestep. He made Whitaker come to him all night long. Now, he couldn't produce the knockout that I know he wanted. And he would have if the knockout would have come. But what he just did instead was he just used that jab, sidestepped, made Whitaker come into the range of all his punches. And he didn't go hook crazy in this fight like he did in his other ones. It was mainly the jab. He threw the hook. Don't get me wrong. You can't. You'd have to remove some cells in Trinidad's brain to not throw the left hook. He's going to throw it. But it wasn't. He didn't make the staple of his offense off of it in this fight because he knew it wasn't. His dad had him primed and ready. Your hook's not going to be your money punch in this fight. You use your jab, your right hand. You're going to make him walk into your punches. You're not going to chase him. You're going to make him come to you. And that's how you're going to win this fight. Now, you take the Whitaker that fought Chavez, who is younger and more spry, and you put him in against this Trinidad with that game plan. Does Trinidad still win? Personally, I believe so, but we know what my feelings are between the two fighters. So objectively speaking, I'm just going to say if Whitaker wins, it's going to be a very long, tough fight. If he's able to pull that off with Trinidad fighting that smart, that controlled, with that kind of a game plan, which is going to make Whitaker fight outside of his game plan of making the fighters come to him, backpedaling, and then countering off of their lunges, Trinidad's not going to lunge. He's going to make Whitaker come to him. So if he did it in this fight, there's nothing in my mind to believe that Trinidad would have done any differently any other time because his dad had the game plan. His dad told him, this is how we're going to win. This is what we're going to do. In between rounds, he kept saying, this is what we did in the gym. You're doing great. This is how we practiced. This is what we planned for. This is what we did. His father kept saying those kind of things through the translator. So if that was the idea then, I have every confidence that it would have been the idea if it would have been back in 1994. Oh, yeah. And then there's the illegal hand wraps comment that someone had to make.
Well, I want to say a couple of things about this fight. Number one, that was an excellent breakdown. And it sort of makes me wonder what type of things people would have been saying in the build-up to this fight had the internet been around. I mean, the internet was around, but obviously not to the level it is now where we got communities on YouTube and all that and so many people getting involved in the discussion. Whitaker, like we said, he had to sit out 1998 because of his drug use. So he was out for about 16 months, but equally or near equally, Trinidad also had a layoff. Why was he laid off for so long, though? I don't get it. Trinidad.
Promotional, managerial / promotional problems.
Right.
You remember he had a fight with Larry Barnes on HBO in a Pernell Whitaker undercard. Thinking that was the Jake Rodriguez fight. He was trying to leave Don King then, and it didn't work. He came back, and Trinidad came back and fought Zulu. And that was the only fight he had that year. Then he fought a Colombian named Pineda, not Rafael, but a different one. Hugo, I believe, was his name, who had already lost to Kashizu. I think that was his first HBO fight. This was his second fight on the HBO contract, if memory serves. I'm not near my computer, so. But between the Zulu fight and the Pineda fight, and then from the Pineda fight, they were trying to make this happen. So
I think the Pineda fight was afterwards, wasn't it?
It wasn't after this fight. I thought I'm pretty sure it was. No, you're right. It might have been after this because the big fight post Pineda was De La Hoya, not Whitaker.
Right.
I think you're right. I had that mixed up. I got my I got the Whitaker and De La Hoya fight mixed up with Trinidad's career.
How dare you?
So I think you're right. This may have been the first one on the HBO contract, and Pineda was the second one.
Well,
So that meant the Zulu fight was the last fight between there and here.
Right. A couple of more notes about this fight. I can't understate how, like Chief was saying, the fact Trinidad was sort of this guy who'd been fighting on Showtime. He'd been complaining about not getting the big fights. I mean, he'd fought Maurice Blocker. That's who he got the title from all the way back in 1993 when he was only 20 years old, Trinidad. So very young. He got that title very young. He beat Camacho. He beat an undefeated Yuri Boy Campos, who a lot of people were saying was going to be the next Julio Chavez. He beat Obakar, got dropped, but ended up dropping him. But he wasn't getting the big marquee fights. And so this Whitaker fight was the first time he was fighting against somebody who had a name and who was still seen as being a viable contender for being the best welterweight in the world. The only other guy who was comparable to Whitaker was Camacho. And that was a guy that Trinidad beat up. Camacho made it the 12 rounds because he was clinching a lot, fighting in the ass style, and back foot bitched it. Whitaker certainly didn't fight that way. Again, this is another one of those fights where he showed his grit. He went at Trinidad, maybe because he didn't have a choice. I don't know. Maybe at this point he felt his reflexes were dulling because of his lifestyle. Also a combination of the fact that Trinidad was very accurate. Chief, I remember a lot of people thinking that, well, De La Hoya was a better boxer. This was what people were saying at the time. De La Hoya is a better boxer and faster than Trinidad. Therefore, Trinidad is going to do worse than De La Hoya did, or he's going to struggle a lot. The opposite seemed to happen. I think people realized that Trinidad, although he looked very mechanical, actually was a pretty good technical boxer.
He was. He fought this fight incredibly smart. They studied this fight a long time. They wanted this fight for a long time. They wanted this, but by the time De La Hoya was coming around, also they knew they wanted the De La Hoya money. But this was really the fight they really wanted because, like I said, they won their titles the same year. So this fight was in '99, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so they both won their belts in 1993. 6 years in the making, Trinidad wanted this fight. I never heard, and if someone can correct me, I've been wrong before. I never heard Whitaker ever call out or acknowledge Felix Trinidad. Trinidad said after every fight, Pernell Whitaker, Pernell Whitaker, Pernell Whitaker, Pernell Whitaker. He wanted Pernell Whitaker. There was a point in time when he and Terry Norris were going to fight because Trinidad went up to junior middleweight, knocked out Troy Waters in one round, and then Norris left Don King to go with Bob Arum to try and get a De La Hoya fight. So when I say Trinidad was the boogeyman, Terry Norris wasn't afraid of anybody. He was just going where the money was. But the point is, I got to fight one of these young guys. Am I going to take on Trinidad, who's this tough lion, or am I going to take on De La Hoya, who's going to bring me $8 million and be a tough lion? That's where he went. So too much risk, not enough reward. Nobody wanted to fight this guy. There was listed at one point in time in Ring Magazine where they'd say upcoming fights, Trinidad Corte, but I don't know what happened there. I just remember Trinidad always wanted the big fights and couldn't get him. And it was just because he was just too good. I mean, yeah, it sounds like I'm really riding hard. I love Trinidad. I did. He's one of my favorite fighters. But it wasn't just one of my favorite fighters. He was really, his career shows he was a great fighter. But he wanted this fight the whole time. And again, Whitaker never really showed any interest in wanting this fight until he had to take it. And then when he had to, he realized it was too late. If he would have ever won easily, he waited too long.
Yeah, man. I mean, somebody was saying in the chat that, Whitaker was inactive. Well, we pointed this out in the beginning. Trinidad was inactive too coming to this fight. And even though he was younger and wasn't doing crack cocaine like Whitaker, he did struggle mightily to make the welterweight limit. This was a time where Trinidad was starting to consider going up in weight. But again, there was a Whitaker fight, there was a potential Corte fight, and of course the big golden goose in De La Hoya. So for them, straining themselves to make 147 was worth it. But yeah, lest you think that Whitaker was the only guy going in there with asterisks around him, Trinidad as well. But I do agree that this was a what's the word I'm looking for? A diminished version of Whitaker. And again, this is the fight that Whitaker showed his grit more than ever because he was clearly outgunned against a bigger guy, younger guy. He's trying to do everything he can. He's trying to rough him up. He's trying to work his way on the inside, even though he knows he's outgunned. And he even hurt Trinidad at one point with an uppercut. I forget which round it was. I think it was in the middle rounds where he started making a mini comeback. But in between that, he got dropped. He got badly hurt in the later rounds. So it's amazing that he managed to see that. That could have been a knockdown there. They didn't count it. The old tricks just weren't working anymore. The magician's magic was sort of waning at this point. The dipping below the waist, all that type of stuff, the legs just weren't there anymore. Neither were the reflexes. And so it really is a testament.
Well, and when he did that, Trinidad knew what to do. When he ducked below the waist and did everything else, Trinidad just sidestepped and used his jab and said, okay, well, when you're done playing, I'm ready to fight in the middle of the ring.
Mm-hmm.
He just didn't fall for it.
Yeah, Whitaker fought like hell in this fight too in the last round. But then here you see him in the later seconds ran out of steam. That should have been a knockdown, by the way, because his ass touched the canvas, and you're not allowed to dip below the waist either. See that he fell there against the ropes. That should have been a knockdown. But still, I mean,
well, if the punch would have landed, then maybe. But that's the one thing. Like he's doing all that, and his butt does touch the canvas, but no punch lands. So I don't know what the referee does there.
I mean,
I guess you could equate it as the equivalent of willingly taking a knee and call it, but no punch landed. Yeah. So, you do what the referee did. You wipe the gloves off and say, all right, get back to work. Stop playing around. For the record, I think it was about 10 months Trinidad was off between Zulu and Whitaker. So he wasn't off quite as long as Whitaker was, but it was almost a full year. So yeah, it was just it was a younger guy with a long layoff, not an older guy with a long layoff. And I'm pretty sure Trinidad was living a pretty clean life at this point in time too. He wasn't. Every fighter starts to party more when they get to be larger than life, and Trinidad eventually got to be larger than life, especially in Puerto Rico. But at this point in time, he was hungry, he was motivated, and again, between the two of them, this was the fight that Trinidad wanted. This was never the fight that Pernell wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, I've said that that the Duvas maneuvered him certain ways, but he always liked to say, "I want Chavez, I want Chavez, I want Chavez," till they fought. He never said, "I want Trinidad, I want Trinidad, I want Trinidad, I want Trinidad."
Interesting. I mean, you would know. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't following the behind the scenes stuff as like you were back then, but I mean, once he did fight him, he despite his advanced age and his drug use, he did fight well. We just couldn't keep up with Trinidad. The other thing about this fight is that, again, you compare the De La Hoya fight to the Whitaker. This is the fight that afterwards made a lot of people go, well, Trinidad convincingly beat Whitaker, whereas De La Hoya couldn't, therefore Trinidad's going to beat De La Hoya. That's what a lot of people were thinking. Also, keep in mind that this fight was on HBO Sports, and back then, HBO Boxing really was, because this is a World Championship Boxing event, not an After Dark one, World Championship Boxing. They made it seem like it was a pay-per-view event. It was Madison Square Garden, which was Trinidad's home, essentially, even though New York's essentially Puerto Rico. Packed house, incredible atmosphere. A lot of people felt that this stole the show from a week earlier, which was a pay-per-view when De La Hoya fought Corte. And even though that fight was good too, a lot of people felt that this was better than that one. So it was laying the groundwork for a De La Hoya fight later on that year, which did end up happening that year in September, a couple of months afterwards. This was in February, I believe. But yeah, man, so this was Whitaker's last hurrah. He lost by the unanimous decision. He still complained, Chief, about it afterwards.
That he was robbed.
That he was robbed, yeah.
The paraphrasing, I'm going to quote to the best of my ability, but it's mainly a paraphrase. They've never seen me lose before and then didn't see me lose again tonight.
Yeah, and Merchant was pressing him. I mean, he wasn't...
Yeah.
I mean, he's like, come on. He's like, what are you doing, Pernell? You got to keep it real.
Going back to the character about this, on everyone's got a level of hypocrisy. I know people in the chat can throw stuff at me also. But when you're in the public eye, I'm not famous. I'm just a guy that that's lucky enough to be asked to be on your show. Whitaker was a Olympic gold medalist, professional world champion boxer. He's famous. Okay, what I mean by this is this. After the Chavez fight, he was so upset. He's like, if a guy actually finally beats me, I'll be the first one to go up and shake his hand and congratulate him. Well, you didn't do that to Tito.
Exactly. Yeah.
You didn't even shake hands with him after the fight. He clearly beat you, and you cried robbery. So, I mean, that just goes to like some of the characters I try to talk to him about. Like, as all of his amazing ability, people like to try and say, "Oh yeah, real class act" about certain guys that they liked their style for. Let me go ahead and rain on everyone's parade. I don't think there's a such thing as a boxer as a class act. They've all got some kind of demon skeleton or bad habit or something. I get it. But hypocrisy is one of the things that usually annoys me the most because you can only be taken as your word. And in the South, you know, by a handshake and your word. And so when you say, look, the first time someone legitimately beats me, I'm going to go be the first one to shake your hand. And then when it finally happens, you still cry about it. Then you just, the class that you have is in your bank account, not in your character.
Exactly. Absolutely.
And that's what I got from him. That's the kind of person I really got him to be. Based off if things didn't go his way, even dating back to the Olympics, it's something we didn't talk about in the box office. He had to actually win twice to go to the Olympics because he was the champion, and then the box off alternate beat him in the first round, and he had to go back and win the second one. He even said he had his bags packed and he was going to quit boxing after what he thought was a controversial 3-round fight that he still had another chance to win to go to the Olympics. He was going to quit just because that one didn't go his way all the way back then. And those are his words.
Oh, interesting.
Not mine. Then he talked about how he wanted to quit after Ramirez. Then he talked about how he wanted to quit after Chavez. And then he didn't shake Trinidad's hand when it was all done. So he was very skilled. And I don't give him enough credit for what he was as a physical talent. I really don't. And I'll be here the first to say that probably the slickest fighter I've ever seen in my life. And I've seen some good fighters. And Zab Judah did his best to try and emulate him. And at times he showed glimpses of it, but could not perform what this guy did.
Mm-hmm.
Floyd Mayweather's a really good defensive fighter, but it was blocking shots. This guy made you you couldn't touch him. So he had a skill level that needs to be admired, and I need to give more credit towards. But the character of the person, I will not tread one bit on. He just was not something you wanted to role model after when it comes time for how you conduct yourself.
Well, like you said, every fighter has a certain degree of arrogance to him, and they need to be able to compete at the highest level. But Whitaker, yeah, like you said, he took a little bit to the extreme. And I'll say this. He complained about the Ramirez fight, the first one. Okay, that's a robbery, if you want to call it that. Chavez fight, a little closer than the Ramirez. I mean, closer than the Ramirez fight, but I still thought Whitaker clearly won that, despite his venturing into the dark arts. But he won it. He called it a robbery. Then the La Hoya fight happens. That's way closer than the Chavez fight. In fact, a lot of people now saying, yeah, De La Hoya edged that fight. He calls it a robbery. So now you're starting thinking, okay, so what's a robbery? Because if you're saying that Ramirez fight is a robbery, but then you call the De La Hoya fight a robbery too, does he really think in his mind that it was as one-sided for him as the Ramirez one? See, that's what I would have liked to ask him if he was honest. And then with the Trinidad fight, like Pernell, would you tell me really that fight was one-sided and you won it just like you won the Ramirez fight and the Chavez fight, or like you deserved to? I mean, come on. So he was just being stubborn. Reminds me of when Juan Manuel Marquez lost to Tim Bradley, and he said for like the fifth time in his career, because I mean he said the Norwood fight was a robbery, the Pacquiao fights were robberies, and he that Bradley fight they robbed me, and he's all pissed off and everything. I'm thinking, come on, man. I mean, you can't admit that you lost to a younger guy. To me, that's the saving grace. You gave him a good fight, but you were too slow fighting out of your natural weight class, fighting a younger guy, and you got outboxed. No, I got robbed. See, when a fighter starts yelling wolf too often, that's when it sort of pisses me off. But first of all, last thing, so Whitaker loses to Trinidad, stays out of the ring until the new millennium, 2000, comes back on ESPN against journeyman Carlos Bojorquez, who's a strong guy at 154, so Whitaker returning to that division. Uneventful fight for the first couple of rounds, and then, what, did he break the clavicle or something? I forget exactly what he injured himself.
It was somewhere near the shoulder area. I thought it was dislocated shoulder, but let me rephrase. It was retired on the stool due to injury.
Right.
And so I'm going to call it what it is. Not a doctor, didn't see an X-ray, so I'm going to take it as word that he was older. He'd already accomplished everything he needed to do in the ring. The writing was on the wall. This isn't going to work anymore. But the fall far from grace. It was no longer on HBO. It was on ESPN. So the writing's on the wall of like, look, this is your. I think the Duvas were still in his corner, but it was like, this is your last shot, and if this guy's causing you to get injured, your body can't take it anymore. And it was time for him to go based off of just longevity. You know, when the journeymen start to get competitive against anyone, that should be your sign of like, hey, okay, um, I need to think about making different life choices, because this is a dangerous sport. It only gets worse. You don't want to really damage yourself down the road. And it wasn't a pretty ending for a guy that had a glossy career, but it usually isn't. Boxing's pretty cold like that. That being said, he that was his next fight after that, and then some of the out of the ring stuff, and the more out DUIs and other stuff started to happen. So by this point, it's obvious the fact that not only is he older, not only is he past his best, he's not living the right life, and he can't live that life and still perform in the ring at the same time. And so that was his last fight.
Well, BoxRec has this to say about the fight. He did in X-rays later show that he ended up fracturing his left clavicle.
Okay.
And it's interesting. Jimmy has touched on this before about why these guys start getting injured. It's not only the age, and then on top of that, Whitaker's lifestyle outside the ring, clearly not taking care of himself anymore. And then on top of that, the inactivity. A lot of inactivity after the De La Hoya fight, a lot of inactivity after the Pastryan fight, the beating against Trinidad, more inactivity afterwards. Just the body can't, the body needs to stay active to condition itself. And we're not just talking sparring and all that. It needs to actually feel the pace of a fight. And he was way too inactive. And one fight per year nowadays seems the norm, unfortunately. Back then, it was considered like, well, where were you a year ago? And so he ended up, I think that contributed to the injury. Thereafter, a couple of days later, he was admitted to a hospital in Virginia because he was having seizures. And his girlfriend, when she plays a call to 911, she believed, she sort of intimated that he might have been overdosing cocaine. Whitaker later on said that it was a mixture of pain medication and alcohol that led to my fit. But yeah, that's better. Oh, come on, Chief. But anyway, he ended up retiring.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that, but I mean, I was just trying to say, like,
Well, I'm just trying to be the good guy here against your obvious anti-Whitaker bias. But
sorry.
No, I'm kidding. But listen, so he ended up retiring afterwards. There was a good ending to this story. Well, not a good ending. He did end up cleaning himself up a couple of years afterwards. Started coaching people. Started training the prodigy, Zab Judah, like you mentioned, the guy that a lot of people thought was going to be the next Whitaker. Unfortunately, Whitaker ended up getting hit by a car, which always seems like an extra tragic ending to me, because it's one of those things that we all do. We all cross the road, and to be hit by a fucking nut job. I think the guy was, I forget the details. Like, I think the guy was inebriated, the guy that hit him. Or maybe it was
also late.
Yeah.
It was also late at night, and it was in a dark area. I think Montbrink can, in the chat, can probably allude to more of that than I can, because I live in this area now, but I'm not from here, and this guy says he is. So it might have been, but what I do remember is the fact that said it was dark. There wasn't a lot of lighting nearby. He's trying to cross the street, and inebriated or not, and I do believe there was some inebriation involved on the driver. They didn't see him, and it was not. I mean, look, you can say whatever you want to about me when it comes to my fan shit. No one should go like that. He was still young for death. That is, I mean, he wasn't an old man when he died. He was still training fighters. He was doing better with his life, and he should have been able to enjoy his life as a Hall of Famer now that his career was over. There's a local watering hole around here, a bar and grill, that has one of his Ring magazine belt and one of an autographed magazine of him, and the manager there says nothing but great things about him. When Whitaker started to do his appearances in places like his promos, this guy actually kind of took over as his manager because Whitaker was paying out of his own pocket to go to these places, and there's like, no. If they want you, they need to pay you. They may not need to pay you like to actually be there, but they need to pay for your flight. They need to pay for your hotel. You know, you're taking your time. And so this guy kind of became a pseudo manager. I wish I could remember the name of the dive that it is. It's a pretty cool place.
Was it a crack house or? No, I'm
No,
kidding.
no.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Sorry.
My neighbor, who's in the Navy, it's his favorite place to go. And every time we do special occasions, we go there. And I always end up talking to the manager and getting a new story about Pernell all the time. Aside from him that I didn't know as a fighter. So now it's going to sound like I'm changing my tune. I'm not changing my tune. I'm just noting the fact that there's different parts of people's personalities. And I've keyed in on what Whitaker was and the personality he showed as a fighter while he was famous. This guy talks about how Whitaker just kind of like said, hey, why don't you just, Whitaker started taking him on all these trips. So this guy had like first class tickets, staying in hotels at these nice places and all these meet and greets that Whitaker would do. You know, he didn't have to do this for this guy. It just kind of happened. So there's a side of him, obviously, that I haven't been talking about, but I don't truly know. I've only heard about it recently from living in the area. But, I don't know how to close out on the fact that, there's more than one side to every person. And apparently there was a side to him that he didn't show when the cameras were on. And people around here really love him. They still do to this day.
Well, I mean, yeah, we were talking about we can't talk about a boxer and his career and all that without mentioning what type of person he was. I mean, if you talk about Carlos Monzon, eventually you're going to have to bring up the fact that he threw his wife off a balcony. I mean, it is what it is. But whether Whitaker was an asshole or wasn't, or doesn't matter how much of an asshole he was, doesn't change the fact that of everything he accomplished in his career. Doesn't take away a world title, doesn't take away a win, doesn't deduct rounds from him. He might have been a distasteful person outside the ring, but inside that ring, he was one of the best to ever do it. And it's interesting because you look at a guy like Zab Judah, who's in this picture. Junior welterweight titleist, undisputed welterweight champion at one point, albeit for a short time, but nevertheless, more than most boxers ever accomplished. Zab Judah was more physically talented than Pernell Whitaker. He was just as fast, if not a little faster, and he hit harder. And so that was the book out on Zab Judah when he would turn pro. He's Pernell Whitaker with speed. Remember like a couple of years ago they were saying about Bronner? He's like Mayweather but with power. Well, it just goes to show you how hard or difficult it is or what Whitaker ended up doing was, because he couldn't crack as hard as Judah. He was a smaller guy, even at lightweight, shorter guy, and yet look at everything he accomplished. It was about skills. It was about panache. Yes, there were some dark arts involved, but that comes with the territory. It's not like he was an all-out, he wasn't headbutting or elbowing. Again, I'm not excusing his behavior, but whether he was dirty or not, the Chavez fight, I will say those low blows might have swayed the fight because that was evident, or more evident than anything else. But everything else, the dipping below the waist and all that, would it really have changed the fight all that much? I guess we could have a debate about that at another point in time. But everything he accomplished, he didn't accomplish it because he was the fastest necessarily or the hardest puncher. He just, like you've said before, Chief, he had a bunch of good attributes and he was able to put them together every fight to become the fighter that he was and who was consistent.
If I can wrap up something real quick by making one analogy into another. First of all, anybody out there who's listening about this right now, Rich, the fighting historian on YouTube, look him up and favorite his stuff. What I'm about to say comes from him. It talks about a fighter whose name escapes me right now, but I just watched the video last night. It was a fighter who became Joe Louis's trainer. And so what I'm getting at is Joe Louis was the fighter he was because of this fighter that became his trainer. He listened to that guy, and that was Joe Louis's lifeline. Pernell's lifeline was Georgie Benton. If you look carefully at Whitaker's career, as we start talking about the later fighters that he fought after Chavez, Georgie Benton wasn't there anymore. It was Ronnie Shields. And Ronnie Shields is a good trainer. Very good trainer. Not taking anything away from him. It's not the same dynamic. And the difference with Zab Judah and Pernell Whitaker is Pernell didn't want to get in the ring without Duva and Benton in the corner. He trusted both of them immensely. In Zab Judah's case, the Duvas had him and sponsored him throughout his amateur career, and then by the time he got ranked, he fired them and went back to his dad. What I'm getting at is when the guys get you there, the ones that, same with Vargas, they were taking him through his career. Then once he got the title shot, he fired them and went back to Garcia's dad. Point is, these guys that get you there, when you have a good relationship with them and you trust them immensely, you're not going to vary from what they tell you. You're going to do exactly what they tell you because you trust them and you know it works. Whitaker knew whatever Georgie Benton told him was going to work. And Georgie Benton knew what Whitaker was capable of doing. Duval was just the guy. Georgie Benton's a very slow, was, because he's passed away, God bless him. He's a deep voiced, low talking, slow talking man. Duva can get a point across in 10 seconds. Well, you've only got a minute in between rounds. So the whole time those fights were going, Georgie's talking, Lou's downloading it. And then when they get in the corner, Lou's the one to give them the instructions real quick because they've only got, they got a minute, but you got probably 30 seconds to get in there. Lou's a big guy, so he's not getting in and out of the ring that quick. To get in there, put a little bit more Vaseline on, give him a sip of water, give him some quick instructions to work on to get back out. Georgie couldn't do that. He talked too long, too slow. So that was the dynamic between them. And Whitaker trusted them immensely and never dreamed of going to a different training combination than the two of them. Lou and Georgie had a falling out and they brought in Ronnie Shields. That wasn't Whitaker's call. He trusted the two of them completely. And so when I get to the difference between him and Judah, is Judah thought, I'm good enough to where I can go back and do this and go with my dad. Whereas the better boxing mind was Duva and especially Benton, and Whitaker never varied from that. He kept them all the way through till to the end. And I think that's a big difference, is the fact that he stayed with what got him there, and they capitalized on what he could do, and he never questioned them. Whatever they said to do, he knew it was going to work, and he had faith in them, and they had faith in him.
I mean, it's the importance of having a good trainer or people around you that know what they're doing. Or, like you said, sometimes people just hit it off and it works. Just to round this up, because we're almost at the 4-hour mark here. I think this even went longer than the Chavez fight. But maybe because I drank coffee, we were able to keep it over there longer. But yeah, man, I mean, this was a Pernell Whitaker retrospective. Like we said, we had to debunk a couple of myths, but overall, he's one of the best to ever do it. People can learn a lot. If you're a boxer, you're not going to be able to, I mean, unless you have the same physical talents that he had, you're never going to find a guy to be able to replicate that, or it's going to be rare rather. But you can still pick up a couple of things from Pernell Whitaker. His ability to fight on the inside, maybe certain defensive moves. So there was that, but he was just a guy that you would never teach a boxer how to box the way he does. That was his own style. He had his own spin to it. And again, take away all the talent, take away the reflexes. He's still a very tough guy in there. He would go and get it. Was. And all the politics aside, that comes with the territory of boxing. Chavez had a couple of those too, De La Hoya too. So it is what it is. But overall, his career is still that of one of an all-time great. Luckily, he was alive to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Or in other words, he witnessed his Hall of Fame induction.
I was there.
Well, oh, really?
Yeah, I went. It was the year that Ricardo Lopez and Roberto Duran, and I don't remember his name, but we've talked about him before. That really tall Argentinian trainer. Those were the guys that got inducted that year.
Are we talking about that really old trainer?
Yeah.
Ismael Barca, I think, or Braca.
I believe that's him. Yeah. Yeah.
Damn.
He got inducted as a participant, but not fighter. I don't remember who the pioneer was, but he had already passed away. But his daughter had donated his belt for posterity to the Hall of Fame temporarily. And then the three active fighters were Ricardo Lopez, Roberto Duran, and Pernell Whitaker.
We got to do the Duran one. Now that you mention it, Duran is the next guy maybe to do a retrospective on. But yeah, that's interesting that you went over to that induction. I mean, man, seeing Duran and Whitaker together, that's pretty high profile right there.
They were never in the same place at the same time except for at the banquet for anyone to do who would have been the better lightweight? Who would have won between them? They were never in the same place for anyone to try and stir that one up. I know we
One
got to
last,
go, but I do want to say one thing real quick about that Hall
right.
of Fame that time. Fly on the wall, as like a kid in a candy store. There's a golf tournament there used to be a golf tournament every year. And so somehow or another, this guy that worked at the post office volunteering, talked to my wife and got us in for free.
Whoa.
So we get in there and there's a barbecue luncheon. Now the fighters have their own table. And as I'm going around, I end up meeting Marvin Hagler's son, who was from Atlanta, and I'm originally from Georgia. So we had hit it off a conversation. So I'm sitting at a table with him, having lunch, and then Hagler comes over and sits, wants to be near his son. And then Duran was signing autographs, and this is the time when people were getting a lot of stuff on eBay, and they were getting a lot of autograph stuff to sell later, and the fighters could catch on to that. So when you're signing like 5 or 6 things, the fighters usually started getting mad and would get up and walk away. So Duran gets mad, gets up, walks away, starts cussing in Spanish, comes over to the table and sits down, sits right across from Hagler, and they start talking. Only fighters are supposed to be sitting at this table, and family. Obviously, I'm related to nobody, but I'm just, because I was talking to Hagler's son, a bodyguard came up to try and kick me off the table. The guy goes, "No, he's with me." And so I just kind of sat there and I looked over at my wife and I mouthed over to her, it's like, "I'm having lunch with Durant and Hagler." And she goes, "I know." And I'm just kind of sitting here like, this is really happening. I'm the only non-fighter at this table right now. And I just kind of soaked it in like, I don't think life gets any better than this.
I don't believe that story. Let me tell you, I don't believe it. No, I'm kidding. No, because I'm saying it must have been surreal to see. I mean, because Duran and Hagler. I mean, come on.
Well, the first one, I just gotten Duran's autograph before when I went to go sit down and talk to Hagler's son. And when I got up there, I'm 30 plus years old, and I still acted like I was 6, going, "I've been waiting my whole life to meet you." And he just, "Oh, hey, Papi, says a bunch of stuff in Spanish, then grabs me and kisses me on the top of the head and signs my autograph. I'm like, I already thought the day couldn't get better. Mm-hmm. So when I walked over and I saw Hagler's son again. We started talking. He sat down to eat, and so did I. And so when we sit down, Hagler comes over and sits down, and I'm just like keeping my mouth shut because I'm like, okay, I'm not supposed to be here. And then when Duran comes over and sits down across from Hagler, I'm like, hold on, is this really happening? And I looked over. This one bodyguard always loved I won't say loved. He respected the fighter's privacy, and so I wasn't supposed to be at that table. And so he came over to try and tell me to move, and Hagler's son goes, "No, he's okay." And I was just like, this guy just shoot off a bodyguard for me to be able to sit here and finish having lunch with Hagler and Duran.
No, that's surreal, man.
Okay. Anyway, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to take up more.
That's all right. That's right.
Whitaker.
It's surreal. It's surreal. By the way, John Gonzalez, he says, "You're welcome, Chief." So he's the guy that set you up with that table. So shout out to he's kidding, obviously. John Gonzalez has no pull whatsoever with anybody. So, but anyway, one last thing about that. Pernell Whitaker, did you ever talk to the guy? Did he mellow out? Because I said he mellowed out, but I really don't know. I was just going off what other people said.
So there was a place called Graziano's that everyone would nightlight at, and he really did. He did not embrace the limelight. He didn't ever try to get at that ceremony or that induction weekend. He came to do the meet and greets and sign the autographs and stuff, but he never really tried to command attention. I remember one night at Graziano's, we were out there, and him and 3 guys were talking in the parking lot all night. He didn't come inside with everybody else. I'm not saying he didn't drink. I'm not saying he didn't come in and grab a drink and go back out. But he, when Terry Norris and Livingston Bramble and all those guys were just partying up, having this great time inside, he was outside just kind of staying to himself. He did not seem comfortable there, to be honest with you. He was honored and his speech was nice. But he really didn't seem like he wanted to be in the middle of the crowd. And maybe he was like that his whole career, and that's why he was when the camera was on, it was the way it was, because he really didn't like the limelight. He embraced it the way he only knew how to. I didn't know him intimately that well, like I did some other fighters who I got to know offline. I just know that at the Hall of Fame, he seemed very content with just signing autographs when he needed to, and then being away when he didn't have to be around everybody.
I'm kind of the same way. I can sympathize because whenever I go to large gatherings, I'm not comfortable, maybe because I'm an introvert naturally. I don't like to make the rounds and talk to everybody. Although I can, obviously with age, I've gotten better at that. But my first instinct is to just, if I find somebody interesting, I cling on to them and I just talk. Not out of choice necessarily, but it's just sometimes I do get caught up with the conversation. Maybe that's what it was with Whitaker too. He didn't feel comfortable making the rounds, being the politician, shaking everyone's hand. He just found somebody interesting and just stay there.
Yeah.
I don't know. Interesting guy though. Interesting guy. Again, the mentality that you have to be a consistently successful professional fighter, boxer. It's a different world, and who knows what type of guy he was, and maybe that's why he started dabbling in the narcotics, because he just had to maintain that edge. I don't know. It would have been interesting to hear him talk about it more as he got older, but unfortunately, he passed away. Got taken from this world too soon. Chief?
Well, real quick
Yeah.
on that watering hole place you like to go to. I'll see if I can get in touch with the manager and do like a small little one-on-one. And not to say we're going to do a whole nother show on Whitaker, but whatever he tells me, I'll relay back to the show to try and give an insight of who he was outside the ring sometime, just to try and show a different light on him.
There you go. All right. Well, Chief, man, I want to thank you, man, because again, this was an impromptu, or relatively impromptu show, even though we'd planned it for a while, but I want to thank you for being on. You winged it, and we still went for 4 hours almost. So I can't imagine what it would have been like if we would have actually fucking provided more details. But it's just, I think we did a pretty good job of covering the most important points as quickly as we could. So shout out to you, Chief. Really appreciate it, and I want to thank you again. Can't thank you enough for being here. Shout out to everybody that donated via the Buy Me a Coffee. Shout out to everybody in the chat, except John Gonzalez. No, I'm kidding. Shout out to Pancho Villa, Eparokua, the aforementioned John Gonzalez, Jump Tube, Donovan McNabb, Rapax Trunking Company 10-4, Baron Evola. People are talking about Monzone. People are talking about Duran. Again, the sky's the limit when it comes to doing this type of show. So I want to thank everybody who joined us. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks again for listening. We'll try to be back as soon as possible. I know everyone wants to talk about this potential Canelo fight. Who's he going to fight next? Is he going to fight Jake Paul? If he fights Jake Paul, who's he going to fight in September? Believe me, we're going to talk about it, all right, fellas? But shout out to everybody in the chat, everybody who listened. Don't forget to hit the like, subscribe if you have to do so already. Don't forget to join our Patreon. If you're interested in more of this type of talk, don't forget to check out our Boxing's Most Shocking Moments of All Time, Volume 1 and 2 on this channel. So check out it. Actually, there's in the Volume 2, we actually talk about Whitaker Trinidad. Or I think it's in Volume 1. I forget. Go check them out. Some of the more obscure moments, too, of boxing. Not necessarily the most shocking, but some of the most shocking and obscure moments. Again,